I am going to kick off this evening's school committee meeting with our 30 years of service recognition. I have a few remarks, and then I'm actually going to turn things over to people who know our honorees very well and have remarks to make about each individual. It's my distinct honor to welcome everyone here tonight as we recognize a group of educators and staff for their 30 years of service to the students and families of Brookline. Before we hear remarks on each of tonight's honorees, I want to remind everyone present that 30 years ago was 1987. On this day in 1987, the Berlin Wall was still standing. The first generation Macintosh computer was only 3 years old. The second generation Mac SE cost anywhere from $2,500 to $3,500, and that was the one with the little screen. Dirty Dancing was the big summer movie blockbuster. Stamps cost 22 cents. And there were only 5,600 students enrolled in the public schools of Brookline. What each of you has accomplished in these 30 years is nothing short of remarkable. You've touched the lives of countless students and families over the years. The impact that you have had can be measured by the joy your students have shown, the thank you letters you received from families, and the success your students have achieved over these many years. While 30 years seems long ago, I'm sure that it has passed in an instant. The students and families who you have impacted over the course of this 30-year instant are indisputably better for having known you. In order to properly thank and celebrate each of you, we've invited colleagues who know you well to say a few words. We'll begin these remarks with Vicki Milstein, principal of Brookline's Early Education Program, who's speaking on behalf of Merrill Foreman.
I am going to stand in front of the podium. I'm not. I'm standing at the podium. I don't usually. Oh, hello. Okay. You know, it's hard for me to stand behind a podium. Hi. I am having the best honor of being able to talk about Merrill Foreman, who is one of the cornerstones of the Brookline Early Education Program. Merrill and Ellen Goldberg together have built this place and have been here since the beginning. There is a wonderful quote that I love, that wonder is the beginning of wisdom. That was Socrates. And I don't know how he came up with that without knowing Merrill herself, because she is the embodiment of wonder. She delights in everything children do. She joins them in exploration and discovery, and she's able to calm them in a way that is wonderful. If you can watch Merrill with children, you'll see somebody who is playful, who has the coolest stuff that she does. She is the rock star with her bags of goodies, and all of that to get children to develop hand muscle and coordination and eye-hand control and their sensory system to be integrated. All the things that children need to be successful in a classroom begin with somebody like Merrill. She once told me a story about her son having a friend who was invited over, and she heard over the phone that the friend didn't really want to come over because at Merrill's house, things were kind of old-fashioned. And don't say a thing like that to Merrill Foreman, because there was the challenge. And as I recall the story, the most fabulous day was spent, and the friend who was not so sure about coming was delighted with his experience. And that is what happens every day when Merrill is working with children. There's a story of a little girl we have in school who has very little language and has a diagnosis on the autism spectrum. It's been hard to make a connection and work with her, and it's been hard to get language that comes from her. But one day, as a warm-up, Merrill was taking a little bit of lotion, and this is a wonderful OT. You'll all want to sign up for Merrill when I tell this story. And a little bit of lotion and rubbing it into her hands and on her arms because that warms you up. And she wanted to say something to Meryl when she was done rubbing, and she doesn't really talk very much. But finally, the words came out of her mouth, both hands. She wanted Meryl to keep going with both hands. Don't stop that. Now, if you can make that kind of a breakthrough in one session, you have really got some special talents. I want to say, too, that Meryl has been a lifelong learner herself. She has led this department in areas of the zones of regulation. She has sought out and learned about social thinking. She has taken the coursework and became a BCBA. She's everything you want in an educator, and she's got a heart as big as her spirit. And it is my privilege to be able to honor her with 30 years of service. For a photo opportunity? Come, you get to, come, you get to stand and have your photo op, and you get. Okay.
Thank you so much. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm going to take a moment to recognize our next honoree, Nancy Springer, who would like to be here tonight, but she can't attend because tonight is her retirement party. I'm going to read a statement that Dan Green, a colleague of hers at Pierce, wrote. It is with profound respect and admiration that we recognize Nancy Springer for her 30 years of service to Brookline Public Schools. Nancy joined Pierce School for the first time in 1980 and immediately developed a reputation as a caring, smart, talented, and collegial fifth grade teacher. After transferring to Runkle in 1983 and then taking some time to focus on her young family, Nancy returned to Pierce in 2004. While Pierce's open floor plan is not for everyone, Nancy appreciated the quirkiness of the architecture and the creativity and collegiality it encouraged. As a fourth grade teacher, she worked tirelessly to support the unique needs of hundreds of students. She brought learning alive for her students while establishing herself as a caring, dedicated, and supportive colleague to her peers. In her years at Pierce, Nancy spearheaded a running club, co-coordinated the Pierce Mentoring Program for African American and Latino students, and served as a BEU building representative. In 2014, she was recognized for her myriad accomplishments and talents with the prestigious Calverley Teacher Award. Nancy will be retiring at the end of the year and will be missed by everyone at Pierce. However, her countless contributions to Pierce's culture will live on. As one colleague shared, Nancy brings a zest for life and teaching to Pierce each and every day. She's a master teacher who loves her students and makes all of us stronger through her encouragement, friendship, and dedication. We thank Nancy Springer for her 30 years of service.
Okay, just very quickly. Nancy was my daughter's fifth grade teacher, and she was amazing. I'm sorry she's not here to be able to tell her personally this, but she was probably one of the best teachers my daughter ever had, and so that's what I want to say.
This time I'm going to ask BHS Headmaster Anthony Meyer up. He has several people he will be presenting, beginning first with Betsy Davis.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, school committee, and thank you, friends of the public schools of Brookline. So as part of this process, I solicited feedback from people who've worked closely with Betsy, and in particular, Agnes Alberola, our world language coordinator, and Mindy Paolo, the district ELL coordinator. I wrote some things too. I'm going to not read those because this document became so long. We had so many things to say about Betsy. So from Agnes, Betsy is a master teacher of French. When I watch Betsy teach, it is hard to take notes because I find myself wanting to participate rather than observe. 30 years later, she still questions herself and is keenly aware of each student's needs. Her passion for the language and students is evident. Betsy has refined effective ways to engage students in authentic communication while learning vocabulary and grammar. She keeps a fast pace, but her careful scaffolding of activities, clear organization, constant feedback, and command of French enables students to progress quickly through a very intense curriculum while getting enough practice and feedback to develop fluency in the areas studied. The creative touches that Betsy adds, songs, illustrated stories, poems, motivate her students who are clearly in love with the language and hungry for the meaningful communication that she sets up. We are so fortunate that Betsy chose to make Brookline her professional home. From Mindy, Betsy started as a part-time ELL teacher in 1985 and has taught English learners off and on for over 31 years at Brookline High School. In 2003, she assumed the role of International Student Advisor. In both capacities, Betsy has successfully worked with more than 1,000 students from all around the world. She consistently works hard to establish meaningful relationships with students, families, and colleagues. She treats each of them with dignity and respect. Families and staff often praise her warm, welcoming, and caring personality, as well as her willingness to go above and beyond to make sure everyone is supported. Betsy is adept at working with all students along the learning continuum and stages of acculturation. In fact, on any given day, she can work with multiple families from very different cultures, help a student who needs college planning support, teach a lesson on civil rights, collaborate with a colleague about a struggling student, advocate for a student in an IEP meeting, communicate via text messaging with a student who has been absent from school too long, and much, much more. And she does it all with a high level of professionalism, grace, and sincerity. Betsy takes great pride in her work and is a highly respected member of the ELL department whose commitment and passion for excelling are commendable. I am grateful for her years of service to the public schools of Brookline and wish her many more. I will add my piece just because I think it goes further into the International Student Advisor role, which is so important in Brookline. So beyond serving as an excellent French and ELL teacher, Betsy is a superb International Student Advisor. She helps BHS families from around the globe feel known, supported, and comfortable as they navigate a new school. Perhaps more importantly, Betsy fosters the very sense of community our international families need. When challenges arise, Betsy slows things down and helps ensure our solutions are student-focused and growth-oriented. We are deeply fortunate to have Betsy Davis in our classrooms, on our high school leadership team, and in the lives of our students and families. Thank you so much, Betsy.
Thank you.
Headmaster Meyer will continue with the presentation on behalf of Kathleen Exer.
Thank you. So for Kathleen, I solicited feedback from Kenny Kozel, who is our K-12 Performing Arts Coordinator, and Kenny and I both worked with the Performing Arts Department at Brookline High School. So Christian Polos, Mary Mastandrea, Carolyn Castellano, Mike Driscoll, Myra Hernandez as well. So Kathleen Exar is the longest tenured member of the Performing Arts Department of the Public Schools of Brookline. She is one of the core members who helped to build the oldest public school dance department in the country. Bears repeating. She is one of the core members who helped to build the oldest public school dance department in the country. Before any of the other teachers currently working in the Performing Arts Department, Kathleen came to Brookline as a passionate professional dancer, determined to share her passion for dance with students and demonstrate the value of dance as an important part of a Brookline education. Since then, she has taught dance and yoga, another passion of hers, and also a class she has taught at BHS, to literally thousands of students. Prior to becoming a dance teacher, Kathleen was one of the most prominent and sought-after professional dancers in the Boston area, with an illustrious career with many professional companies, including Impulse, Susan Rose, and others. When Kathleen joined the Performing Arts Department at Brookline High School, she helped create what are now important Brookline High School traditions, including our annual dance concert progressions and our annual celebration of all the performing arts revisions. And anyone who knows, works at, or has gone to Brookline High School knows how incredibly important these events are to our school community. Warm-hearted and incredibly generous of spirit, Kathleen shares her passion for the performing arts with her students and colleagues alike. She teaches through example, always ready to dance alongside or take the lead with her students. Thank you so much, Kathleen.
And a third presentation that Mr. Morrow will be giving tonight on behalf of Marianne McCarthy.
Okay, so for Marianne, I worked with Hal Mason, our assistant headmaster, and we came up with this. When we think of what makes Brookline High School so well loved by the town, we of course think of the everyday learning that goes on in classrooms and the valued work of the teaching staff of the school. However, there is far more to what makes for a successful high school community, and many more people who behind the scenes support our most important work. Fortunately, tonight we're celebrating several of these people. Marianne McCarthy has for 30 years been a vital part of this hidden work at BHS and in our community. When Marianne does her job best, and she always does her job best, you would not even know that she is there. It would be impossible to quantify how many disputes and ill feelings Marianne was able to soothe and resolve. Marianne's role as campus security aide is valuable because of her immediate, everyday interaction with the staff and students. And in this capacity, she is a key reason why this complex community of over 2,300 people works so well. Her practical nature, common sense, and everyday willingness and readiness to understand the workings of the teenage mind certainly bears repeating. Understanding the workings of the teenage mind. What a mystery and wonder it is. Make her a valued and essential part of Brookline High School. For 30 years, BHS has been a safer and happier place because Marianne McCarthy has been there, walking the halls of the school, offering us all a caring, thoughtful adult presence. Thank you so much, Marianne. Not hidden anymore.
Now I'd like to ask Principal Dave O'Hara, Devotion School Principal, to come up and speak on behalf of Mazal Jarrett.
Good evening, everyone, school committee, and honored guests. Congratulations to all. I'm sorry, let me clear my throat. Mazal Jarrett. The first descriptor that comes to mind, and to explain our esteemed colleague, Mazal Jarrett, is simply a ray of sunshine. For the past 30 years, Mazal has been nothing but an illuminating figure to the children she has served. Formerly a TBE teacher that has transformed into an ELL teacher, Mazal has put forth her sunny disposition and intense love of children. Each encounter, meeting, and greeting with Mazal comes with a huge smile and an embrace. Her affection is infectious. Mazal makes every person in her midst feel special as she welcomes you with open arms. Mazal has an incredible warmth to the children she works with. Mazal supports so many non-English speakers, and especially our children from Israel. Mazal continuously and lovingly welcomes families to our devotion community. The inside joke around Devotion School is that there's a billboard in Israel with a photo of Mazal, her radiant smile that states to families, "Come to America." And when you do, enroll your children at the Edward Devotion School in Brookline, Massachusetts. Mazal has been the link to our families in their often challenging transitions to a new country. Mazal has fostered so many positive relationships. Mazal is a dedicated teacher, mother, wife, and role model. She began her career at Heath School and has been Devotion's treasure for the past 20 years. Mazal continues to be an extraordinary resource to so many in every aspect of our community. So on behalf of the entire Devotion School community, the children who love you, the families who cannot live without you, your colleagues who so admire you, and an administration who says thank you, congratulations on 30 wonderful years. You're truly the ray of sunshine that inspires all of us at each and every turn. Congratulations, Mazal.
You know how lucky I am to have him as a principal. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. We all are lucky.
And for our final presentation tonight, former BHS math teacher, BHS assistant headmaster, and Public Schools of Brookline Director of Human Resources, Steve Barrasso, has returned to speak on behalf of Linda Kirby.
He just took the first 5 minutes of my talk. This November, though, will mark 50 years since I began my student teaching at Brookline and was hired the next year in 1968 to teach high school math. And as has been stated, I was a math teacher for 26 years, assistant headmaster, and I finished my 40-year career as the Director of Human Resources. But you're not here to listen to me talk about myself. I'm here to recognize Linda Ritter Kirby, a product of the Brookline Public Schools. She went to the Lincoln School, and my wife found a picture of Linda with her little pony pigtails as a softball player in 1974. She went then to Brookline High School, and it was a cheerleader for the football team, and graduated in 1979. And after a few years, returned to Brookline in the Alcohol and Substance Abuse Program with Ginny Goulet. It was from that position that she began to be noticed by people. And in particular, Meade Reynolds, who was the housemaster of Lincoln House, he had a position open and immediately scoffed Linda up. Linda, as a secretary for a house, is probably one of the most difficult jobs in Brookline. You have to deal with 250 staff members, 400 students, and the loving parents of each one of them. And she did that with aplomb. She worked for me also in that department, as I was in charge of mid-year and final exams, and Linda typed them up for me. Thank God, or they would never be produced. Linda then got promoted, so there's a theme here. She was recognized and was promoted to the assistant headmaster's job as secretary. And she did scholarships and the dollars for scholars. So she had to communicate with parents, write letters, thank you notes. And I then joined the assistant headmaster's job after Linda. She continued typing my mid-year and final exams. And we did the state testing and, of course, the wonderful renovation. And I was blessed to have all of my secretaries, Linda, Gail, Joanne, Annette, Teresa, as helping me form a team that worked together. Linda could have had a second job, I think, as a wedding planner, because the scholarship breakfast that took place at the morning of graduation was like a wedding. She had to design the tables to have the students and the parents and the benefactors, and it went off beautifully. I then moved on to the HR director and immediately took Linda with me. A fool I was not. But it was 9 months later that she was stolen from me by Nancy Lane. So all along, people have said to me, she is the most competent and hardworking person that you would want to have in that position. And I attest to that, as did all of the other people that stole her from me, or I stole from her. I was lucky also to be on hand for the birth of her two beautiful children, Mary Kate and Casey. So it is with great pride that I introduce to you Linda Ritter Kirby. 40-some odd years, not just 30. She's been with us more than 40 years.
No, we're gonna leave that right where it is. Thank you.
So before we conclude this portion of the evening, I would open up to any comments that the committee members may have for our honorees.
Not say something, right? I just wanted to congratulate everybody. Most of you I know and have had interactions with throughout the years, and you're all exceptional in what you do, and I can't tell you how much I and the school committee have appreciated all your years of hard work. It's really wonderful, and thank you.
Well, I have worked in 3 different school systems over the course of my career. Most of my time was spent in Brookline. And what we have heard tonight is exactly what makes Brookline the place it is. It's the people who work in the system at all levels, right through, and we have such a range of people here tonight. But what happens here is that we all learn from one another. We learn about what we're teaching, we learn about how to deal with children, we learn how to deal with one another, and it is, for the most part, a school system in which you can rely on those people around you to help you do your job. And I think that the group we have here tonight is just so exemplary and such an illustration of this. And I say congratulations, and I hope you work another 10 years here because you're all special.
Well, I would simply like to say thank you so much for your service. It is my pleasure to be able to express that on behalf of all my colleagues and of the families and the entire public schools of Brookline community. And with that, I will invite you to stay through the evening as we conduct school committee business, and also understand if you have other places to be and things to do this evening. It's been a great pleasure to hear about your service to the town and to the public schools. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Robin, do you? Robin? Robin?
I am a little hobbled.
Yeah. Robin? Want to do the count? Should we do the calendar?
Let me explain this now. I'll just quickly explain to the committee and members of the audience and public. We have a bit of a technical breakdown that was not able to be fixed, which is why we have a smaller projector in the middle of the room for this evening's meeting.
All right, so our calendar for the remainder of the year is up, at least on this screen, and I will just call your attention to the fact that there's a flurry of subcommittee meetings to round out the year. All of the, and in particular, curriculum still has school improvement plan meetings that are happening at several schools and are always exciting, and other committees as well. I'll also just point out that I guess both of our building planning committees are in recess, and so stay tuned, but there are no current meetings scheduled for either the high school expansion building committee or the 9th elementary school building committee, and we have one remaining school committee meeting on June 15th, 2 weeks from tonight, and then from there we move to our summer workshop in July. So at this point, I had some music queued up, but I'll keep us moving forward. I have some remarks which I want to acknowledge a number of my colleagues and former colleagues for their contribution in helping me put this together. So, for those of you who are just tuning in, welcome to Season 10 of the Susan Wolf Ditkoff Leadership Show, in which Susan appears to have folded her cape and neatly tucked it away in the closet, only to come zooming out again, here presenting the dynamic new 9th grade Academy to town meeting, there reminding everyone that there are and always have been 2 more years of projections included in the last Override Study Committee report, and everywhere asking those hold your horses and pull them up short questions like, compared to what? But before we go any further, let's rewind the tape and recap seasons 1 through 9. Even in those first episodes, Susan's vital role was quickly understood as she went to work on the Finance Subcommittee and the Curriculum Subcommittee, which she went on to chair, and the Ad Hoc Strategic Investment Committee, which she also went on to chair, and the Strategic Plan 2.0 Committee, and as liaison to the Selectmen's Committee on OPEBs, and to the Solid Waste Advisory Committee, and to the Brookline Education Foundation, and to the Labor Advisory Board, and to the Town School Partnership, and anyway, you get the idea. In 2012, otherwise known as Season 5 or B-Space Part 1, Susan was elected Vice Chair of School Committee, where she served for 2 full years, immediately followed by 3 full years of service as our chair. And there's been a lot going on. Bridging her service as Vice Chair and Chair, Susan also co-chaired the 2013-2014 Override Study Committee in their exhaustive efforts leading to the successful 2015 operating override, as well as the debt exclusion vote to fund the Devotion School project. And it was during that period in Seasons 7 and 8 when we first adjusted our hearing and our vocabulary to some of the most infectious Susanisms, catching snowflakes as we budgeted for scores of new teachers, guidance counselors, and math and literacy specialists in the face of the hundreds of children appearing throughout the district like new fallen snow, and landing planes as Susan and co-chair Dick Benka labored to herd the many override study committees, subcommittees, and their chairs, and their factions, and their multiple majority and minority reports and information requests into flight lanes, and onto runways, and up to gates, and unloaded, and all the members safely home. Susan is the master of the deep dive. This, in fact, is an essential aspect of her leadership, combining her unerring sense of what is truly important with her fearless determination to get everyone to roll up our sleeves, seek understanding, and develop and implement solutions. Susan has led us in deep dives. Can I borrow your water here? Thank you so much. Into PSB's technology plan, to increased financial transparency and improved long-range budget planning. In particular, Susan's Navy SEAL strength deep dive readiness has been continuously demonstrated in her unfaltering attention to issues of equity, fairness, and reducing the achievement gap. She's led us in crafting statements that unanimously affirm our commitment to each and every member of our community, including transgender and undocumented students, in efforts to hire and retain diverse staff, and in developing and adopting new PSB policies on hazing, bullying prevention, discrimination, sexual harassment, and retaliation. Meanwhile, with her other hand, and while shepherding 3 children through preschool and elementary school, and while zipping back and forth on red-eye flights to meet with her clients in London and on the West Coast, she has steadied the tiller and steered us forward through unprecedented enrollment growth, expand in place projects to accommodate over 1,500 elementary school students and Devotion and the 9th school and the high school. Successful leadership transition with Joe Connolly as interim and Andrew now finishing his first year as superintendent of schools, along with countless other challenges, big and small. So, what's her secret? The simple answer is that there isn't one. Susan's leadership flows from her energy, commitment, and determination, her fearlessness, her commitment to communication and collaboration, and above all, her deep sense of what is right. She works hard figuring out where we need to go, and then she works hard getting us to go there. I am very grateful to have served as vice chair with Susan for the past year, for the collegiality, the collaboration, and the learning, and I am equally grateful for her continuing service on our school committee. So, as a small token of our gratitude for your many years of dedicated service in the chair, it's my pleasure to thank you on all of our behalf and to present you with this small gift.
I'm speechless. I've been instructed by the chair to open it, so I will. I will follow the guidelines of my chair. I like the wrapping paper. Only about half of that was true, by the way.
Listen.
Oh, goodness gracious. It's a gavel.
And it says,
It says, Susan Wolf-Ditkoff, who's married to a judge and will never get to use this gavel. No, it says Susan Wolf-Ditkoff, Brookline School Committee, 2014 to 2017, Chair Extraordinaire. Thank you. I saw this agenda item and thought it was a bit of a joke, so I didn't prepare anything. But my goodness, I'm overwhelmed. And this is an incredible committee, and I'm delighted to serve as a plain old member for the next 2 years. So thank you all for being an incredible group of colleagues, and thank you to all the teachers who are such incredible leaders in our community at so many different levels. So thank you. It's an honor to serve.
all right. On to the consent agenda. So I would entertain a motion on 3 past records and a student trip to high school girls' crew in Sarasota, Florida. Ms. Charlevsky, thank you.
I'll move it.
Is there a second? You?
But
Discussion, yes?
yes, I don't know, are you going to be talking about the crew team in your superintendent's report? Because if you are, then I'll shut.
I was not planning on it.
Okay, well, then I will, because there are 2 young women who made nationals in crew, and it's really pretty exceptional. So I think we should be very proud that we have that. We've had men make it in the past, but not women, and so it's just exciting.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Appears to be unanimous. All right, we now move on to public comment. No one has signed up for public comment. Is there anyone who would like to make public comment? All right, thank you very much. We are ready for Mr. Lantos. Thank you very much. You never know.
This must be a great meeting for all of you, from celebrating the 30-year teachers to then welcoming our exchange students back and getting ready for graduation. The group, this is our 17th year of running the China Exchange, and the group just got back Sunday at 3 o'clock, so they're a little bleary-eyed, not quite over their jet lag, but you don't want to hear from me. I want to ask several of the students to come up and say a few words, and I think we'll first have Ms. Julia Rocco, who's the teacher, come up and just give a short reflection on their last 4.5 months in China. Before I call the kids and Julia up, a few thanks to Kelly McDermott, the secretary at the high school, who through whom I do all of our financial arranging, and it's a complex program to have to arrange payments and monies transferred and wires to and from China to pay for a lot of the group's activities, to Bill McCarthy, who also manages our China Exchange account behind the scenes, and he does all of the accounting for all of the various clubs and activities at the high school, and he's a kind of behind-the-scenes hero. And all of our Chinese counterparts. I don't know if you folks who have been to China who may have met Shi Ying and Shide Yu, who are collectively me in China, and I communicate with them regularly. They have come here twice in the last 3 years, and I think Andrew and Anthony had the pleasure of meeting them when they came to the high school last year. We're hoping, again, I said this last time I was here, to try to send somebody or some of us as a delegation to China, just because FaceTime is particularly important in this program, that we see each other, exchange greetings, of course, and then do a little bit of work to try to make the program, which already works very smoothly, even better for coming years. So I just plant that as a seed or idea. If I encourage you to consider, I think we're talking maybe about April, possibly, but if that's something that is possible and of interest, I'll be in touch. So with that, Julia?
Hello, everyone. We just got back from China on Sunday, so I don't feel like my brain has quite gotten back yet, although I'm physically here. But I'm just so grateful for the opportunity that I had and that my students had to spend 4 months in China. It's a really unique experience. There are not very many districts that give this kind of opportunity for both professional and really personal development for teachers and for students. We really had the opportunity to immerse ourselves in the culture, which gave us all a fresh perspective. And for me, that perspective also extends to my professional life, to be able to see a very different education system. And there's a lot that we can learn from them, and there's also a lot that really makes me appreciate what we have here at Brookline High School and the autonomy that we have as teachers here. And I think it also, for me, was an opportunity to get to have a different kind of relationship with students and to really get to know them in a different way than I do in the classroom. And I think coming back, it also will change the way that I see my students in the classroom. So I'm so grateful to the school committee and to the superintendent for continuing to support this program, which is really incredible. And I want to turn it over to a couple of my students who are going to talk about their experiences.
Hi, my name is Jake Boyd, and I'm a junior at the high school currently. I'll be a senior next year. And I, among the others that are here, was really lucky to be a part of this program. I just want to talk about my trip a little bit and how much it's meant to me. So although I've lived in Europe and traveled all around the world, going to China was a completely new and fresh experience for me. That really opened up my eyes to a whole list of things, whether it's the school in China, the school system, the social life, the professional life. Really, everything is just so different, and there was so much for me to see and admire and experience. And for me to be able to go on this trip was really, really incredible. Not only was I given a new perspective that is really valuable to me in my life and even now and in the future, but I've also made so many connections with students at the Gaoshan High School where we went. I made lifelong friendships, most of all with my host family, who I lived with for 4 months. Being able to live with them and understand their life and become a part of their family was really, really incredible. They were so kind to me and really took me in as one of their own. And it was really just such an incredible experience. So thanks to all of you for making this opportunity real for me. It's really, really incredible, and I never really could have imagined going to China for 4 months. As a kid, like I never really imagined I'd go somewhere so far and so different. Seemed like another planet, but I was really lucky enough to take advantage of this opportunity. And so thanks for all of you. Thank you to Julia, to Steve, to everyone else involved, because it really has made a big impact on my life. So thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Sophie Allen. I'm a senior at the high school this year. Last time we were here was this fall when we were introducing the exchange students who had come from Xi'an to live with us and attend Brookline High School. And I had such an amazing time getting to know my exchange sister Kate and showing her around Boston and Brookline High School. And when I traveled to Xi'an this spring, it was so much fun to see her family and have the roles reversed, and now she was showing me around Gaoshan High School. And at Gaoshan, my classmates and I learned a lot about the intensity of the Chinese education system, and we got to see firsthand what school was like for students on the other side of the world. We also learned about Chinese history, and last week when we were touring Beijing, it was interesting to finally visit the sites like Tiananmen Square or the Forbidden City, which we've been learning about throughout the semester. So thank you so much for supporting this program.
And I wonder just briefly if there's, maybe Suzanne, if you wanted to say a few words.
Hi, my name is Suzanne Boyd. I'm the mother of Jake Boyd, and I can't tell you what a privilege and experience it has been not only to welcome a Chinese student into our home for 5 months, but to see my son go and experience life in a different country. You know, when George, which was our Chinese student, was with us, it was during the elections. And what an amazing experience for him to see our political process, to hear the discussions, the debates, you know, and just, you could see his mind turning. And, you know, in many ways, I think he could see the positives of democracy, but he could also see the benefits of his culture, and he would share that with us. So I think it was an incredible learning experience, not only for him, but for us as a family. I think the most powerful and impactful thing for me as a parent was talking to Jake on the phone just about 2 weeks ago, and he said, "Oh, hold on a second, Mom." So I held on, and his host mom had walked into the room, and they were having a conversation back and forth in Chinese. And it was, what an experience to hear your child speaking in a completely different language, communicating with someone else on the other side of the world. So, you know, I think to understand the power of what this program provides, it's something that these kids can bring with them back to Brookline High School, back to this community, back to wherever they go, and in the future, wherever they go, they will take this experience with them. So I can't say enough about this program, and really what a tribute to all of you for being this progressive, this forward-thinking, and supporting a program like this. So truly grateful. Thank you so much.
Good. Thank you, Suzanne. And I can't stop, I can't leave here without saying thank you to our two wonderful Chinese teachers who aren't here, but without them, none of our students would have had the ability to go and have that conversation in Chinese. So thank you to Li Hua Shorter and Futsang Chang, who are just, I think, just the most amazing teachers. I mean, all of our world language teachers are phenomenal, but you know, when the kids come back, they first come back to the high school and check in with their Chinese teachers to say, "Hey, I'm back, we did it." And you know, they just they really get our kids prepared well to be able to do what you just heard about. So thank you to them. And lastly, next Wednesday, June 7th, we have an annual welcome back banquet in the MLK room, which will be at 6:30 Wednesday, June 7th. And of course, all of you are invited. The kids have put together about a 45-minute presentation, which they then take to show to each of the 8, and next year, hopefully, or 8 grade schools, so that the 7th and 8th graders can hear about the China Exchange program, and then that'll inspire them hopefully to take Chinese when they get to the high school and consider applying. So they did their first one today at Devo. How'd it go? Tomorrow at Pierce across the street at 10 o'clock. But they'll give their formal presentation 6:30 MLK next Wednesday. It'll be a catered event, so come hungry and hope to see you there. Thank you.
Any questions from school committee members? Ms. Scotto?
And a comment. I was struck as I listened to the young man when he said it seemed like another planet. And I think that's perhaps one of the most important lessons that you have learned. We assume that everybody, in a sense, has a life like ours. And it's not so. It's different all over the world. It is difficult to convey that. Even when you travel on a vacation, you're skimming over the surface. You're not seeing life as it is really lived in a different place. Whether that place is somewhere in this country, somewhere in China, all over the world, there are places that if you were dropped in them and you were living that life, it would seem like another planet. And it seems to me that that is a really important lesson to learn, because as you grow up and as you begin to get involved in the political life of this country, it is really important to know that some people don't have the kind of life that we are lucky enough to have. Although China, I'm not implying that they're not lucky, because they have a very good life there, but it's very different. People are living in different ways, and that doesn't make our way better than theirs, but it does make it different. And if we want to move forward in this world, we need to be aware that everything isn't just like our life here. So I think you've learned an important lesson, and I think that's one thing that the China program does. I urge you to continue to explore other programs that allow you to immerse yourself in a situation that's very different from the one you live. I think there are important lessons to be learned. But thank you for running this program for so many years and doing such a fabulous job. And I also have to say thank you to the teacher. It's not easy to pull up your life and go off somewhere else, but we really appreciate your being willing to do that.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, put a plug in to be a host family. I was a host family with my family probably 15 years ago. It was a long time ago. And it was just a wonderful experience. And the Brookline High community really came together, and the host families did a lot together. And I think it really made a difference. And my children didn't actually go over to China, but we had some of those same experiences by hosting a Chinese student here. So I'm just putting a plug in. I don't know if you're still looking for host families, but I know they always were. So I want to put a plug in.
I'll be in touch.
Well, I have a question, two questions actually for the students, if anybody wants to take a stab at them. The first question is, if anybody wants to share something that really surprised her or him in China, in that experience of difference. What was something that was just really memorable in terms of being different and new? And then the question that I'm even more curious about, my second question, is the same question, but when you came back to your home planet of Brookline. Did anything surprise you here? Did the world look different because your point of view had changed? Yeah, this is your YouTube moment.
My name's Zach McDonald. I'm a sophomore at Brookline High School. This is the first time I'd been to China, to Asia actually. And for me, before we left, one of the things that the previous year's group had told us to expect was not only to expect culture shock when we got to China, but actually to expect culture shock when we got back to the States. And I really did not expect that at all before going on the trip, but it really rang true with me because China is very different, and it was very strange to get there. But when I came back, it really has been strange to see America and Boston and Brookline now that I've been in China. Just an example of that is just in terms of size. When we had learned about Xi'an, all I remember knowing is that Xi'an is a middle-sized city for China. It has a population, I think, of around close to 9 million people, which would still be larger, I think, than New York. It would be the biggest city in the United States if it were in the States. But Boston, I actually just learned, I actually had no idea before I came on the trip, but I think is around 700,000 people. So, I mean, for me, Boston had always been huge. It had always been, the city that I grew up in. And then I went to Xi'an, and Xi'an is just massive. It's humongous. And coming back now, it's good to be home, but it's just very strange to see Boston in such a new light. And it's not a bad thing. I think it definitely is a good thing. But it's been a very strange experience coming back and seeing it in such a new light. Thank you.
Thank you.
Also she just walked in, but I want to acknowledge Karen Wang, who's an active PTO Driscoll parent, but also are currently taking over with or for Grant Road and his wife Judy Katz, who had served as the chair people for our China Exchange Steering Committee. Karen has taken over that responsibility, so we meet several times a year and discuss how the program can be modified, how it can change, what things that we can do better, what things that we might want to adjust, and I thank Karen for her help and assistance throughout the year. Anyone else? Good.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. Welcome home.
And we'll hope to see you in the fall with the just arrived next group for next year. Thank you.
We look forward to it. All right.
Yeah, just take a minute to warm up. Thanks, Ronnie. Or not? Is it?
That was my plan, was to like go.
added level of technical difficulty. Apologies. Right. So while the projector is warming up and connecting, what I'm going to share with the committee tonight is a compilation of a lot of conversations, brings together many conversations that we have had over the course of the year, both in full school committee as well as in subcommittee, with a real overview of data, in particular focused on grade level outcomes by race and ethnicity. As I'm going through this, I'm going to share both the process for gathering this information and some of the initial work that has happened. Much of what will be proposed or is currently being developed as next steps, and I will share this as I go through the presentation. I plan on bringing to the summer workshop, and depending on who is doing the work. So it'll be a combination of me, Deputy Superintendent Gittens, Headmaster Meyer, Deputy Superintendent Zimmerman, as we look at sort of this piece of our work. So the objectives of this are to further explore for us and to create a better understanding of achievement gaps. We have looked several times at achievement gaps from the perspective of MCAS, and as has been said many times, both in this room and in many venues, MCAS is very much a 30,000-foot look, and it doesn't help us understand the reasons why achievement gaps may be happening. They just identify a broad trend. So it's a starting point, but it requires us to look much more deeply. And I'm going to go through some of that deeper look that we have gone through. And again, as I said a moment ago, discuss priorities for addressing equity and the gaps in equity and access for equity across the district. So just as a reminder, I'm going to take us up 30,000 feet to MCAS, the trend from 2011 to 2016, and we can see that the achievement gap stayed pretty consistent between African American and white students at about 29 percentage points. That's in fact where it was in 2011. It got a little bit smaller, a little bit larger, and in 2016 was right back at 29%. That's in English language arts. In math, over the same time, the gap has actually gotten slightly larger from 2011, a 40-point gap between African American students and white students in the public schools of Brookline, and that growing to 43 points in 2016. This is district level data that I will be showing. It's aggregated by level, so we have some elementary grades, we have rising 9th grade, and we have high school. And I'm going to be sharing data for all students in race and ethnicity. So just as a snapshot, just a reminder to everyone, the district's total enrollment right now is 77,695 students, with 3,133 in grades 1 through 5, 1,656 in grades 6 through 8, 2009 at Brookline High. 19% of our district's Asian, 6% African American, 10% Latino, 9% multi-race, and 55% white. This is another look at the breakdown, same numbers in a pie chart, where you can see that white and Asian students make up 72% of the district. I'm sorry, this is not the same breakdown. The question has come up, my apologies. The question has come up many times about the multi-race category. This is a breakdown of the multi-race category. So within that category that is second from the bottom, the percentage is 9% of the district. 72% of multi-race students are white and Asian. 17% are white African American. 3% are African American Asian. 2% are white and Native American Alaska Native. And 1% are that last combination with 5% other.
So how are you, so on, if you go back a slide where it has broken up by one race, this category is the 9%, that's the breakup of the 9%, the breakdown of the 9% of that category?
Yes. Okay. And it's a question that's come up several times, so we wanted to be very specific about that particular multi-race, non-Hispanic, non-Latino category, that 9% of the district. This is a snapshot of that 9% of the district demographically. So data that we have is available. It's the most recent school year data, the state submissions that have been made to the Department of Elementary Secondary Education. This has 1 year of data in many instances that I will be sharing, and data where the student group is smaller than 10 students are not reported. So I'm going to start at the high school. We're actually going to work backwards in this presentation. So often we start elementary and work through the high school. I'm going to start at the high school and move backwards. And look at the high school about course enrollment by race and ethnicity and course level. We're also going to look at advanced placement, both enrollment in advanced placement courses and percentage of students scoring 4 or higher on AP exams. We're also going to look at behavior and disciplinary data, suspension rates by race and ethnicity. So for high school course enrollment, this is based on current enrollment for this school year. The levels of courses that students can enroll in are in English. Students can enroll in honors. They can enroll in standard. They can enroll in co-taught. The co-taught does have a standard curriculum, but it is a different designation. In math, you have advanced placement, you have advanced, you have honors, you have standard, and you have co-taught. The number of students in each of these is based on unique students, but just want to be clear that a student may show up more than once in a course level. An example of that being if a student's enrolled in 2 math courses, AP Calculus and Algebra 2 Honors, she or he would be counted once in the AP level and once in the honors. So it's just, if you look at the raw numbers, they sometimes add up to a greater number than the overall student body, and that would be why. So looking at BHS English course enrollment, there is some important trends to highlight for the committee. So if you look at these trends, you see that 45% of African American students are currently enrolled in the standard level course, compared to 35%, 32%, and 34% for Asian, multi-race, and white peers. So a higher percentage of African American students are enrolled in standard, and you can see that the difference, and similar trend for Latino students with 47% enrolled in standard, with the difference being largely in a decline in the number of students who are enrolled in honors. You also have a higher percentage of African American students and Latino students enrolled in co-taught courses than in the general standard course and than peers. And the split between the standard and honors is close to even among African American and Latino students, with certainly larger gaps, which are very clear and apparent both on the presentation and what you have in front of you. In math, there's an even more stark gap, where you see 65% of African American students are enrolled in standard level math, which is 29 to 43 percentage points higher than standard enrollment for Asian, multi-race, and white peers. And only 8% of African American students are enrolled in advanced math or AP courses, so the blue and the purple categories. You also see a significant gap in the honors enrollment, with only 20% of African American students, and a smaller gap, but a gap nonetheless, in honors enrollment for Latino students at the high school. So we see an enrollment gap in our more advanced courses based a racial enrollment gap. Most stark for African American students, stark for Latino students, not as large as the gap for African American students. So when you look at the enrollment gap in more advanced classes, you then would expect to see what we have discussed previously, which is the enrollment gap in AP classes. And I'll highlight two pieces of information on this slide. One is that there are only 11 African American students in the 11th and 12th grade who are enrolled in at least one AP class. And that's out of 84 students total, African American students total, in the 11th and 12th grade. So only 13% of African American students in those two grades are enrolled in advanced placement courses. Similarly, you see a gap with Latino students, with only 27 students in those two grades, equaling 27% enrolled in advanced placement classes. And again, given these earlier slides where you see the enrollment gap, this is across all grades, 9 through 12. It's not surprising that what we're seeing is this gap in outcomes for advanced placement classes in 11th and 12th grade. A couple of other important pieces of information for the committee to have is that of the students who took an AP exam, only 27% of African American students scored a 4 or a 5 on at least one of those, compared with 86% of white students and 85% Asian students, 71% of Latino students. So even enrolled in AP classes, you see a significant gap in performance and outcomes, a huge, disturbing gap for our African American students, and a much smaller but still significant gap between Latino students and Asian and white students. Now, before I talk about some of the very initial first steps that are happening in the high school around to begin the process of addressing this, I want to take a moment to talk about suspension rates. These rates were reported, the rates that were reported to the state for the 15-16 school year. So this is a full school year's worth of data. This year, of course, while close to being complete, is not yet complete. So we don't have the full suspension rate data for this year. What you see is that for all students, you see 43% of students having in-school suspension, 57% out-of-school suspension. You see the numbers to the side, 43, 57% for the totals. And this is 50 unique students, so these capture some multiple suspensions. When you look a little bit deeper, you see, and I just actually want to take a moment back. So for that year in BHS, that was 2.4% of the student body suspended, so 50 students out of 2010. Just for some comparisons, Winchester had a slightly lower suspension rate of 1.6%, so 20 students out of 1,200. Newton South had 2.2% suspension rate, 41 students out of 1,825. Needham had a 2.6 suspension rate, 43 students out of 1,671. Lexington had a 3.1% suspension rate, 67 students out of 2183. Newton North had an 8.9% suspension rate, 191 students out of 2142. Waltham reported a 10.5% suspension rate, which 164 students out of 1561. Just wanted to give that comparison. Again, this is the information reported to the state, just so that you could understand, compared to some comparable high schools, what that percentage of suspension rate means, answering the question that is often asked, compared to what? So that's the suspension rate, but compared to what?
So, question: are the factors contributing to suspension consistent across all the different districts you mentioned, or you don't know?
No, they're certainly not, and I don't know what the factors are, but they're certainly not the same. It would, a next step would be looking at the policy, the student discipline policy, individual high school code of conduct policies, and also asking questions about how those policies are implemented. And I'm actually going to get to that as a piece of the work that the high school it has begun around suspensions in planning for next year. Now, when you look at the suspension rates by race for that year, what you see is that you see the total number of students suspended, the 10 unique African American students for a total of 17 suspensions, 12 unique Latino students for 22 suspensions, 24 white students for 29 unique suspensions. When you look at that from a percentage perspective, however, what you see is that you see 12% of African American students were suspended in the 2015-16 school year, as compared to 3% of the white students, 4% of multiracial students, and so forth. You can see in the table in orange.
Do we have any benchmarking on that with other districts in terms of percentage of Black students within or Hispanic students within a particular district?
I don't have that currently, but can get that and can have that for certainly by the workshop, the school committee workshop. So before I move us from the high school to the middle school, I want to talk about a couple of things that are happening. So I'm going to start with suspension. So starting in February, the headmaster, the deans, and I have been reviewing suspension data on a monthly basis. We also took the opportunity to review the suspension data for the first half of the year. One of the things that we found in that is that the suspension rates So one of the things that we noticed immediately is that there is a high suspension rate among ninth graders this year, and looked at previous years and saw a disproportionately high suspension rate also for ninth graders in previous years, and saw a higher suspension rate for ninth graders in the first half of the year historically than the second half of the year. So one of the things, and this goes in parallel with the work that the high school is doing in terms of course offerings to begin the implementation of the educational plan 5 years before the renovated and new building, new spaces open, is to begin implementing the vision of the educational plan now. So Mr. Meyer, along with his team of deans, assistant headmaster, and dean of faculty, Janae Ramos, have begun work within existing resources to build a stronger support system for ninth graders coming in to better understand who are the students who are going to struggle the most with that transition, and how can the high school team get out in front of it. So it will move some positions, it will move people around, it will create a stronger network in ninth grade. We believe that that's better for students overall, and we believe that that stronger support level will have a direct impact in lowering the overall suspension rate at the high school. And the details of that plan are being finalized now, and Mr. Meyer and I plan on bringing that to the workshop to both present to the school committee and discuss as an important step in lowering the suspension rates in the high school. On a parallel track, Wendy Ryder, who is the director of special education at the high school, is working to also address what is a too high suspension rate among special education students. And so on a parallel track, how are we better supporting students? And again, a higher suspension rate among special education students as ninth graders coming in, coming into the high school. So how do we better support? How do we change practice? How do we change implementation of policy and handbook? To Mr. Chang's question initially, how do we actually better implement policy and procedure so that it is more supportive for students? So there is restorative practices where students have the opportunity to learn and grow, as opposed to punitive practices where you have a suspension, which I think generally There's a strong, if not consensus, near consensus, that suspension alone doesn't allow a student to learn from a mistake and grow. It also potentially, especially when you see the total number of suspensions where it's the same students potentially being suspended multiple times, it excludes students from school, decreasing access to the full curriculum, and potentially increasing, it decreases the access to opportunity, and potentially has an impact on overall achievement. So that's one piece of the work that's being done. Another piece of the work that has been really, when you look at the information and you look at the when you look at the trajectory for students once they enter BHS, and what happens when a student starts in a standard class and wants to move to an honors class, and what is the process when a student starts in an honors class, and how is a student allowed to drop an honors class, they're all really important systems for us to look at. Currently, there are not, from our perspective, enough supports in place to support students who want to move from a standard class to an honors class. A student who comes in and maybe enrolls in honors English but not honors math gets into the math class and says, I want to make the change. I want to transition into an honors math class. We don't believe that the appropriate supports are in place to help a student with the gap in learning that they may have experienced because of the different curriculum, pace of material, etc., for that period of time in a standard class. And again, this is not to say that there's anything wrong with the standard curriculum. I want to be clear. There's rigor to the standard curriculum, but it's ensuring that everyone who wants to pursue the honors or advanced curriculum, the more rigorous curriculum, has the opportunity to do so. So that's one piece of it. And again, there are opportunities within the existing resources for the high school team to reconfigure how they are doing tutorial, how math support before school or after school, how different resources, math center, homework centers, guidance. There's a whole number of levels of support that the high school team is exploring so that students who want to make the transition can. One of the things that we've heard loud and clear from students from a presentation that started with the committee in November, I believe, students returning from the MSAN conference, and in many subsequent conversations with students at BHS, is a feeling of once you start in a standard class, it is nearly impossible to make the transition to an honors class. Similarly, we need to look at the process for dropping an honors class and make sure that if a student is struggling, we have the supports in place to make sure that we are doing all that we can to support the student to maximize their opportunity before saying, okay, let's go through a change. So there are questions that we need to ask ourselves as educators about the level of support that we're providing for students.
Could you just go over briefly how a student is counseled into either standard, honors, or AP? Is it open to everyone? Do they need referrals? What is it? How is it that they get?
If you could wait 2 minutes,
okay.
I will embed that into the next part of the presentation. That is a great question, and I will be sure to address it directly. It's linked to the next part of the presentation. Another two important things I want to share with the committee, and significantly more details will be coming at the workshop, is that Deputy Superintendent Gittens and Headmaster Meyer have been doing a lot of work on a reboot of African American Latino Scholars and the Calculus Project. It is clear to us that the Calculus Project in particular has not been living up to its initial vision, has not been achieving its initial vision. And in terms of resources, structures, and supports, there's much more that can be done. And so in terms of specific supports that are in place at the high school, a lot of work has been going into re-energizing, building some additional structures, revisioning pieces that have not been working, and that is all coming together. We'll be ready for full implementation in the fall, and is something that will be prepared to present to the full committee in July at the workshop. Now, course recommendations, and this is linked to the high school, and I think that the challenge is that it's not clear. I think the direct answer to your question is that it's not clear. And so the first outcome of this portion of the presentation is that what we need to do is we need to make clear what does it mean to take AP Calculus? What does it mean to take honors algebra, advanced algebra? What are the specific requirements? What is the level of homework? And what are we going to do to put supports in place? I'll tell a story before I show the slides. As we collected this information, actually I'll hold on the story. I'll show the information first. So for rising ninth graders, course recommendations are made in the elementary schools. Parents weigh in, parents can change, make their own course requests. So there's a lot of input going into this. And what we see is that in the course recommendations, in overrides, and sort of in the totality, we see a gap by race in recommendations to courses. So for English recommendations, you see that 67% of African American students are recommended for standard English versus 27% for honors, and you can see that as a complete flip or near complete flip for each of the other categories. And similarly in math, you see an even starker gap with 70% of African American students recommended and enrolled in standard geometry versus 19% in honors, and you see 0% in advanced geometry out of the course recommendations.
I don't know how you gauge this or whether you can gauge this. One of the things that would be interesting is, you mentioned parent recommendations going into playing a role in determining where students are placed or what classes they enroll in, and how do you understand what kind of advocacy students are getting, within these categories? Are you seeing more advocacy among one group or less advocacy among another? Again, I don't know how you gauge that, but I'm just wondering how that plays into this process.
I believe we need to make clear that, so I believe that there are different levels of advocacy. I don't have specific information to say, percentages or a specific survey. What I believe is that we have different levels of advocacy. I believe that we have different levels of knowledge around the process of enrolling in courses, both coming into ninth grade as well as the process that parents can play in that subsequently after the ninth grade. And so that's a piece of an initial step is communication. There's a communication step between the high school and our elementary schools that has to take place in the fall. There's also a communication step that we as a district have to do with families about what do all of the courses offer, what are the various expectations of the different courses, what are the strengths of these different courses, what are the benefits to weigh, and how that process upon enrollment in February and March, the important role that families play in that process. And so there's a significant communication piece that needs to happen. The lack of communication over several years became very apparent to the headmaster and I as we started touring elementary schools and asking questions. So Mr. Meyer and I went to 4 elementary schools recently and met with a number of teachers, observed some classes together, talked with educators, and the perceptions of the process, or the beliefs about the process, the perceptions of the various courses at the high school, perceptions of what the high school expected varied not only between schools but within schools. So it was a real problem. I think that most important in that statement I just made, that narrative I told, is that it was clear to both Mr. Meyer and I that everyone was deeply committed and worked very hard to make decisions with the information that they had, that they deeply believed were in the best interest of students. This is a structural problem of information not being clear across our district, across schools, for educators and for families, that I believe plays a part in then, I apologize, outcomes such as this. And so I think that's an important piece of the puzzle.
I agree with that. I think that's an incredibly important piece, and I encourage all of those efforts. With that said, even with all the efforts that we make, I wonder if we'll still see an advocacy gap of some sort, and how do we address that how do we think about that advocacy gap when it exists, if it continues to exist, despite our best efforts in terms of our own students?
Well, and to that question, one of the really important things that happened, there were some very hard conversations when we first shared this information with school teams. And so we made this information available to the principals of our 8 elementary schools, 8 K-8 schools. And they had conversations with teams to say, let's look at this. We've already made recommendations. Let's reflect on this and understand what may have come into this unintended bias, what structural failures of the district came into play in our recommendations. And each of the teams, and it's a hard conversation, because when you look at a chart like this, a very fair and first natural reaction of an individual is, if anyone who is a part of the conversation, for an outcome that is so clearly race has a clear correlation to the outcome, is to fear being labeled as racist. And this is not to say at any level that individual people that racism came into play in this decision making. Is the structural failures of communication, information, etc., I think, coming together. And so these were very hard conversations. School teams identified things that they need to know to do this better. Some school teams came back with changed recommendations. They said, you know what, based on what we were looking at and continued conversations, made some recommendations changing course recommendations for high school, looking at students that had similar grades in the elementary school, similar MCAS scores, similar profiles, but had different course recommendations, really asking the hard question, well, why did that happen? And then saying, okay, well, let's change it. We have an opportunity here to change it. And I think doing that this year, during the process, we have learned a lot that we can now put in place and build to have in place as an important part of our work as a district prior to next year's course selection process, both for 8th graders going to 9th and for 9th through 11th graders as they're progressing through the high school.
Ms. Schreiner-Oldham and Mr. Chang.
My first question was, sorry, I forgot my first question now as I was thinking of my second. About advocacy. When you're talking about the parents needing to advocate, do they have to convince someone to allow their child to go into a different, or is it an automatic override? And if you get this recommendation for honors and you say, no, I'd rather have my child be enrolled in advanced, do you just enroll them in advanced?
Yes.
So you don't have to go and petition or anything like
No.
that? And then my second question was with respect to making the recommendations, is there any sort of review process that happens, or a committee that kind of takes all of those recommendations and looks at the big picture before it is actually sent out?
So there has not been, and it is a great question, because one of the things that we've learned through the building project work when Mr. Meyer went to Evanston Township High School and New Trier High School earlier this year, is that at Evanston Township, they had a similar pattern several years ago. They had a similar pattern coming into the high school. They had a similar pattern with advanced placement courses. They had a similar pattern in honors enrollment. And what they did, a piece of what they did was they formed a review committee to review recommendations as a piece of of a solution, and Evanston Township has transformed over the past several years in terms of both access to all courses, so equitable access, and outcomes. And so it's a great question. It's something that it is a piece of what we would propose to do. The details are not built out, but it is very clearly has worked at a large, similar in many ways, high school similar in many ways to Brookline High School. So clearly that is a lesson that we can learn and implement.
So, couple of, I think, math errors here, because I'm looking at this chart, and if you look at geometry standard, all student 135, and then you add the Asian, Black, Hispanic, multi-race, white, you get 135. However, on honors and advanced, you don't get 237, you get 231, and advanced geometry, you don't get 87, you get 80. So just want to point that out. I don't know if something was missing. But
I will review with our data guru to understand what was happening.
Ben, what are the asterisks?
What does that mean?
What are the asterisks?
0?
No, less than.
Do you want to come up and explain?
I guess I'm
this is exactly. This is that caveat.
Fewer than.
Yeah, so when you see an asterisk there, that means there are fewer than 10 students
I see.
enrolled, and so we can't actually tell you what that number is because we don't want to identify the child. So that might be where you're seeing the discrepancy.
Okay.
It's good to have a footnote on the page.
Yeah.
What that is.
Okay. So, as a parent who just went through this last year in terms of a 8th grader going to 9th grade, so I have actually, fairly current experience in terms of how recommendations done and what kind of advocacy, and maybe I'll try something on you in terms of what may be done. In my case, I thought the teacher did a great job because he and the 8th grade teacher and the 7th grade teacher had a chance to discuss and be able to advocate, in a very definitive way. Say, okay, we think your child's ready for this level, even though we had some reservations. We weren't sure if he would be pushed too hard, but guess what? I thought their recommendation was spot on. So if you do the math quickly, last year, I think 8th grader, there were maybe, 460 in Brookline that went to high school. I can't imagine that more than 20% of that, so let's say 80, are what I consider children that's on the bubble, all right? Meaning that maybe 8th and 7th grade teachers see that they have the potential to do that. They just need to be motivated. They need to be taught a certain way. And those students are the ones that, okay, even a subset of that, their parents will maybe advocate, all right? But then a subset of that where maybe a letter needs to go to the parent and say, we should have a conference. We should discuss this about your children's, placement, because we see certain things or whatever. Because in my mind, I think the preponderance are, I think, maybe fairly clear-cut, where there's high conviction rate by the teacher to say, I think this is the right place for them. So there's not tons of number of students where you can't do the outreach that way and say, okay, let's have a conference.
In 7th and 8th grade, or in 8th grade where you're making these decisions, are there parent-teacher conferences where this conversation takes place and the teacher kind of talks with the parent and student about, here's how we came to this, what are your thoughts, or is that not part of it?
Yeah, in many cases, yes. I wouldn't say with everyone, but certainly in many cases. But I think and it likely varies by school, and so this is one of those questions about what are some other systems and supports for educators we can put in place. I've said it several times. Just repeat what Mr. Chang said. The educators are working incredibly hard to make these recommendations, and so I think a piece of this is putting the supports in place so that those conversations can happen at a more systematic, more structural level to make the space for that to happen.
Ms. Federspiel, and then Ms. Ditkoff, and then Mr. Glover, and then Ms. Jarlepsky, and then Ms. Scotto. Ms. Federspiel.
Thank you. I wonder if you could say a few words about what is happening in the middle schools. So, for instance, I'm thinking 6th, 7th, and 8th to get them ready for 9th. Are there different courses, different level courses, for instance, in math or in ELA, or is everybody in just the same standard course? You know what I'm asking?
Yes. So a great question. So our courses in middle school are non-leveled. And so it's a change. And so that's an important question, too, of when you're changing from non-leveled courses to leveled courses, how do you make that transition? How do you do it well? I think the other really important piece, and I will say here, I said it before, and this is a bit of maybe the first time on camera I'm saying it. We are planning a process to dive into a program review in math, because in particular in math, we need to understand what in turn programmatically, what do we need to do to ensure that we are differentiating and meeting the needs of all of our learners, our struggling learners, our advanced math learners across the spectrum, and how do we do that even within the town and the school committee's belief and strong support for heterogeneous grouping through the 8th grade. And there are answers for that, and there's some great supports, work, and resources that we can and should put in place, and we have to really figure out what those are.
There was a time a little while ago when some 8th graders, for instance, that were advanced in math would go to the high school. Does that still happen?
So it does happen on a limited basis. And so I think for a very small subset of students, that does happen. I think that the question of, if you bear with me for a second, I was at a school recently, and in an 8th grade math class, and the level of challenge in the problem that the teacher presented to students, it basically is here is what you have to solve. Use all of the skills you have to come together to get to a solution. And as somebody personally who had enjoyed math for years, well into college, I had to pause for a minute and say, okay, what are all the math skills that I have that I can bring into this question? And the students were deeply integrating math skills. It was a very rigorous, well beyond the standards application of 8th grade math skills. And I think that is what we need to figure out is how do we provide the support so that people can do that, feel safe in doing it, feel effective in doing it. Students have joy in doing it. Students seeing success throughout our middle grade math classes, quite frankly, throughout all of our math classes. Because that level of, it was an incredibly challenging problem, and everyone in the class, Learning Center students, a range of Learning Center students to the most advanced math learners, were all working on the same very challenging problem and having success. So I think that is, in terms of curriculum, in terms of the work of the Office of Teaching and Learning and our math curriculum coordinators, how do we do that in support of our educators?
A couple thoughts. One is it's been a conversation that the school committee has experienced over the last number of years that this starts in the elementary grades, that we do have a flexible grouping and leveling policy. We don't track, and we differentiate, we don't track until, have separate classes until high school, but that there are flexible groupings and levelings that are understood and imagined within our policy, and that those flexible groupings and levels don't with equity, are not sort of representative with equity. So meaning that we don't have strong representation, particularly of Black and Latino students in sort of some of the upper level groupings, even within heterogeneous classrooms. So I think that's one, and I think we know that happens before 8th grade, before middle school. It actually starts in the elementary grades. So I think that's one. I think there's a second whole conversation just about math and sort of how do we think about that. I think there are a number of things happening in these slides, one of which is around is around equity overall and structural racism, institutional questions, and how we sort of look at those processes. There's a kind of a separate carve-out conversation about math in particular, and how do we deep dive on that? And I think there, part of the question is that there are some people who think of math in a very narrow way, which is just computation and getting to the next level from, there's kind of a very clear escalator. And then there are other people who think of math a little bit more holistically in terms of logic, reasoning, spatial relationships, anyway, a whole variety of kind of mathematical thinking and mathematical fluency. And numeracy. And so I do think that we kind of need to have both of these conversations, and they do intersect here, but I'm not sure if tackling, I think if we try to tackle them together, we might miss some of the different effects that we're seeing. And I do sort of wonder, even as we use the 8th to 9th grade as a flashpoint, to what extent that can open up conversations earlier in the middle school and earlier in the elementary grades about how we differentiate such that we don't see this gap by the time they're at 8th grade, because we know it starts early. So even how are kids doing, looking at the benchmark assessment system by race, how are kids doing at some of the other, beginning of year, end of year, right, elementary grades by race. So at any rate, it just feels like there's a whole progression to it, and maybe when we kind of at the building level almost unpacking that.
So on that point, if I could ask, if we could hold questions, because the next portion of this is elementary benchmark assessment by race. And so I just want to share just a snapshot for the committee. So the way the benchmark assessment results are categorized. So again, the benchmark assessment is given twice a year, beginning of the year, mid-year. Students read a text one-on-one with a teacher. It is a combination of a running record where students' fluency, miscues, etc. are analyzed, and there are also comprehension questions. And it's a combination of the fluency and comprehension that results in a student level that correlates to a continuum, a reading continuum, or a grade level equivalency continuum. Categorizes students in 5 levels, so it does not meet expectations. So there's students who are far from the expected benchmark, approaches expectations, and this is an important one because it's not necessarily problematic for a 3rd grader. So the levels for a 3rd grade, for example, are it's an alphabet, are NOP. It's not necessarily problematic for a 3rd grader who you would expect sort of on that continuum or would hope would be at level P, for them to be at level O at the end of the year if you understand several factors, right? The student has brilliant comprehension, but there's a particular skill and fluency that still needs to be developed, or the student has brilliant fluency and great inferencing skills, but has difficulty connecting that text with other texts or bigger ideas. There may be a small reason. So the yellow is important because it's not as worrisome, and often there's a very clear answer that you know exactly the path that a student's on, and it's not necessarily a worry if you're approaching expectations. Of course, meets expectations, exceeds expectations, and then pause and consider. And so this is something that has been in place in Brookline for a number of years, where when students get to above, a grade level above on the benchmark assessment, the assessment ends. So we don't continue assessing, don't ask that educators continue assessing sort of on this, staircase to Z, because there's a point where a 1st grader, for example, who can read 6th grade level text, there's this really important question of is the content appropriate? And typically, and in most instances, the answer would be no. And there are plenty of text, challenging, engaging, rigorous text that 1st grader can read, but we don't need to have that 1st grader only read 6th grade text. And so in terms of this assessment, that pause and consider are students who are a grade level above, and at that point we pause the assessment until the next round. So if you look at the district grade 1 through 5, You see again, you see some patterns. So that on the very left, you have all students. You see 12% of students district-wide of all students are in the red, significantly below, not meeting expectations. Additional 10% approaching expectations, and then the 9, 33, and 36% on or above. If you go to the middle, you see a significant difference in the performance of our African American and Latino students. And what I want to point out is that for both of these categories, the yellow, the green, and the blue for African American and Latino students are similar to the yellow, green, and blue for our white, Asian, and multiracial students. The big difference, now there are differences, so I'm not saying they're the same, but the big difference lies in the pause and consider and in the significantly below. And that's a really important question for us to understand. What I want to say about this is, there are a few things I want to say about this. What this tells us is, I think, differentiation of instruction in early grades is exceedingly important. We got into the conversation about it in math. It is exceedingly important in reading. Students learn how to read on different schedules. They don't learn on our schedule. It is incredibly complex. It is a process. It is a developmental continuum. Within that, however, there are many things that we can do to differentiate instruction, to provide multiple learning opportunities for students so that we maximize opportunities for all learners to grow. We maximize opportunity for our most struggling students to grow. The district committed a long time ago, pre-override, to the Literacy Collaborative. And I think that the strength of the Literacy Collaborative is this. The Literacy Collaborative provides a structure for professional development. It provides a vision for instructional practices. Not a vision, it provides a toolbox. Vision's the wrong word. It provides a toolbox, a deep toolbox of instructional practices. It provides trained literacy coaches in individual schools, professional resources, assessment data. And it grounds literacy in authentic experiences that are student-centered, that are focused on the learning needs of individual students. It is not a curriculum. It is not a day one is this, day two is this. It is student-focused, and it is meant to be differentiated for all learners. It's process-oriented. It focuses very much on the process of learning how to read, and it focuses on outcomes. I think that the other thing that's really important to understand around our literacy work is that the goal is for students to experience engagement, joy, and confidence in reading, for students to develop their own agency in choosing books and topics, for tasks to be authentic, for language and literacy to be developed in the early years through play, through talk, through interaction with peers, to practice reading and writing in literacy time, but throughout the work that students do, to experiment and play with words and language, to engage in many texts, to set individual goals, and for students eventually to be able to evaluate their own progress. The professional development of that work is very much driven by teams in schools, in individual schools. And so here, I think, is a really important opportunity for us as a district to reboot, to be clear about the vision of the literacy work that the school committee, that the voters through the override have supported of Literacy Collaborative in our schools. But to be very clear that vision is, how are we implementing this, how are we using it, these resources, this toolbox, to grow professionally and meet the individual needs of our learners. And that will look different in each school. That will look different at Lincoln School to Devotion School to Heath School, because the needs of learners are different. And it is okay for one school, for example, to focus on interactive writing deeply during a year of professional development, because students need that additional support to take what they're able to decode and encode it into language to produce writing. And that may be a different need based on educators and teams' analysis of the needs, analysis of a deeper level of data than this. And I think that that's a really important place to a point that was raised several times for us to look in our elementary schools. How are we providing these supports, these professional learning opportunities, the resources and support for school teams to be able to analyze their own needs, to set the professional learning agenda with the common goal, but different pathways. And I use this example because of the literacy data, but it's applicable in other areas as well. It's also a really important opportunity for us to look at the interventions. We do a really good job in Brookline with leveled literacy intervention. It's a very highly effective intervention for 80, 85, 90% of students, but not 100%. And what we have to do is we have to support and foster the creativity of our school teams. We have to do research on other effective interventions, and bring those into our schools for the students who leveled literacy intervention, for example, is not meeting their needs. I can tell you for a fact that students in the red category, there are many students in the red category. It's a small number of students, but many of them have in prior years, enrolled in leveled literacy intervention 3 years ago, last year, and this year. And it's an intervention. It's meant to be an intervention to get students to the average point of their peers. And if you're in that for 3 years, it is not an intervention that's working. And so we have to provide other opportunities and flexibility if we are going to meet the learning needs in first grade, so that the conversation is different in the 7th grade, so that we are seeing different outcomes in our high school AP classes. And so this is a continuum. I think that before the computer is pushing me, I'm not sure if that is because I'm over my time. I didn't just push a button, it just changed to questions. Before I open for more questions, what I will say is what's really encouraging about this is that there is a deep commitment across the district to do this work. It's really hard work. It's hard work to say, this is not, the chart of 9th grade enrollment, everyone who looked at it said, this isn't okay. Right? Not everybody had a solution, but there is universal agreement that it's not okay. And I think that that is what's really encouraging in this, is that we collectively, in our schools, our school leaders, our educators, as a community, we are in agreement that this and any other configuration of data that I or any one of us could present, it's not okay. The gaps are not okay. And what we want, what we are deeply committed to, is ensuring that we get equitable outcomes. It's not enough to say, well, anybody can access it, and that's equity of access. We want to be sure that all students can truly access, and that once that access, when students have access, that there are the supports in place to ensure the outcomes that are equitable.
I think I was next.
I
think you
let's
would go
start
that
down
way.
with Ms. Charlowski.
Thank
Move
you.
along the table. How about that?
So first of all, I want to thank you and your team for this really hard work. This is the first time, 25 years on the school committee, we've been talking about equity. We've been talking about, the achievement gap for years. This is the first time that I can remember that we've seen data like this that really, it doesn't give us the answers, but it sure shows us the problem. And without seeing that, you can't tackle the answers. I'm only sorry that Dr. Jackson isn't here at the table listening to this conversation. Maybe she is at home, but it's really important. And to me, going back to that one slide with the BAS data, there's two things that tells me, or that I think that tells me. One is you have kids coming into our system, some kids with 4,000 words at kindergarten, and some kids with 500. And to bridge that gap is where the critical piece is, and that's really hard work to do that. And when we see that the African American and the Hispanics are similar in as to the whole school, then we will know that we've really done the work we have to do with the achievement gap. I mean, I think that will tell us almost everything. We still have to do it for math, but if you can get it in English, I think the math will come along. So thank you.
I remember listening to a presentation, and I can't remember if it was full school committee or curriculum, where the level literacy intervention was discussed. And depending on the staffing in the schools, that really limited who could receive the level literacy intervention, so that in some schools, a certain number of children would receive it, and in another school, they would have many more children who needed it, but because of the staffing, they were unable to do this. Does this situation still exist, and if so, can we do something about it?
Yeah, I mean, there certainly is a limit to the number of students who can be seen through the level literacy intervention. So part of it is supporting schools in scheduling to make sure that the schedules are built as efficient. I hesitate to use efficient for sort of a lot of reasons, but I will say efficient, so that you can maximize, if you build a schedule where no matter what class a third grader is in, they can access the level literacy intervention. It doesn't mean that every third grader in the school is doing the same thing at the same time, but you've created a structure so that it doesn't matter what class you're in. I think that you can. It is. There are many schools that create structures where some third graders might be doing math while other broadly. I'm not talking Brookline specific. Just broadly, it's a problem of scheduling where some third graders are doing math, some are doing reading, and some are doing social studies, some are in music. Well, if that's the scenario and the reading specialist is available during that time, then what happens? Well, some students miss music, and that may be the thing that's their spark, and we don't want that. We don't want students to lose that spark. It may be that students can go into the reading intervention, but they're missing math. So the effect of trying to close a reading gap is you're creating a math gap. And so by being very deliberate, I will say, with scheduling, you can solve some of that. And you can't necessarily get all the space. I will say, one of the things that I assured my team I would share, and I didn't during the presentation, so I'm glad you asked this question because it reminded me, is that our kindergarten educators over the course of the year, working with Leslie Ryan Miller, with Vicki Milstein, have worked collaboratively to tackle the challenge that students have in first grade with accessing text and reading. And we're very clear in sort of a collective decision that bringing in a way and a means to teach phonics, letter and phonics skills in a fun and engaging way would both engage students, would create some foundational skills that students need later on. It is part of the joy of kindergarten, of students learning about and becoming excited about text. And so the kindergarten team across the district next year will be implementing this. And so that's an example of a way so that as that is effectively rolled out, and I believe it will be very effectively rolled out across the district by our kindergarten team, fewer students will likely need the level literacy intervention in first grade, because many of the first graders who start the year in level literacy intervention start there because at the beginning of the year of gaps in those foundational skills, phonemic awareness skills, which then opens up. I keep hitting the microphone. I'm going to move back. Which then opens up space if a literacy specialist who was once servicing mostly first graders, well, now more first graders are reading, or are sort of in that window where we would expect on the continuum, then the literacy specialist has more time in upper grades. And so that's a longer-term solution. The short-term is scheduling. Longer-term is as we implement this, we will see change.
I have a follow-up to that and then a quick math comment. Do we have, in terms of the students in the school, equitable distribution of literacy specialists? In other words, are there enough literacy specialists in the larger schools to do what needs to be done?
So that depends on your definition of equitable. So two of our schools, Title I schools, Devotion and Lincoln, have literacy specialists supported through the Title I grant that are above the allocation at other schools. Joanna Lieberman has worked to create a distribution separate from those the Title I funded literacy specialists that is as close to equitable as possible based on the size of school. There's not it is not an exact formula, but it is relatively equitable. I will get you those numbers. Just want to remind everyone of that caveat that the two schools, Lincoln and Devotion, as Title I schools, the district makes a commitment to use a significant portion of those Title I dollars to fund additional literacy specialists.
And the size of the school population. I'm thinking, for example, Pierce is a very large school. Baker is a very large school.
Yeah, I will get those numbers for the committee, for you and the committee.
One other thing to go back to math for a minute. We've been talking, you were talking about 7th and 8th grade and things that were happening in 7th and 8th grade that would essentially help the teachers improve getting the students ready to go into high school. But I'm wondering about high school. Have we looked at all at the people who are teaching math in high school to make sure they understand how to support the various students that are coming in? Some of which might need much more support if they're going to stay in the honors courses, because we are very careful about that in the middle schools, and I think that that's just very typical of our K-8 schools. But I've always had a sense that the high school has a little more latitude about what teachers do and how, at least this certainly used to be true, and I'm going way back because my kids are old, but there was great variation in the teacher's ability to meet, and I'm thinking in particular in math, to meet the needs of the kids in the class.
So I will bring specifics back to you about the work that the high school's done. I will say anecdotally, I have seen some great differentiation in visiting math classes. Again, I haven't been in every class, but I will say that I've seen some, in co-taught classes to honors, geometry, sort of a range of classes, some great differentiation. But we'll come back to you. I will get the specifics of work that has been done, as well as work that is expected to be done, and bring that back.
Thank you.
Mr. Glover.
I also wanted to say thank you for this work. I think it's really great. I think in a lot of ways it raises more questions, and you want to find out more and dig a little bit more deeply. But it's really exciting to see it broken down this way. And I want to encourage you to keep doing that and keep digging and find out as much as we can about this as possible. To that end, and I know there are only so many hours in the day to do this stuff. At some point, and I'm not suggesting by the workshop or even this year, but it would be interesting if we could ever find a way to correlate socioeconomic and out-of-school activity information, sort of those sort of other things that go into a student's existence and how they match up to these things. It might be difficult to do it. I don't know if we can do it or not, but be interesting to think about ways that we might be able to do that.
We certainly can discuss ways to do that and come back to the committee with ideas of how that could be built, what we could collect, because I think it's a great question, and I think it's an important question for us to explore and figure out. So we can work on developing some ideas around that and come back to the committee with that.
So, let me just make it around the table once. Anyone else?
So not to load on questions, but just to ask it and leave it there. It was one other thing that was striking to me about this slide was that a different way to read it is that 70% of our students are exceeding expectations on the BAS, which sort of begs the question of what level of test, how much time should that 70% be spending on the BAS versus other things? And for that 70% in particular, what are we learning about those students for the time we are investing in it versus saying, we know the benchmark assessment system is incredibly time consuming. We want to make sure that its highest and best use of time is to do some, I don't want to say quick and dirty screen, but something that kind of says, after a certain point, the benchmark assessment system isn't the right test for 70% of our kids, but it's incredibly valuable for 30% of our kids, and here's exactly what we get from it. And we kind of, we redeploy resources in some way, and we rethink what that 70% gets. So I'm not suggesting it, I'm just trying to unpack, like, so what does it mean that 70% of our students are exceeding expectations on the test? And I just don't, and that 35% of them are maxing out, so we're kind of just saying pause, right? So at any rate, and then what? Like what's the set of resources for the teacher to be working with that? So anyway, I'll just leave that there. I don't think it's particularly relevant to the race conversation, but it's just begged the question from this, if I'm reading this right.
I think it's
it might not be.
No, it's a very fair question. It's a question that I've asked, and we simply haven't gone down that path. But I think it's a really important question to ask. In terms of time, in terms of everything you raise, time, resources, it is a question that we need to dive into, and it's one that I have raised, which is why I started smiling when you asked it. It's just we haven't gotten to the point of being able to answer with sort of proposals or ideas of how we might be able to address that that very point that you just raised.
Ms. Tarlowski.
Thank you. So not to add on asking for more, but I will. One of the things that I think would be important to look at, and we've talked about this in the past, and I think you have some of this data, the kids who have gone through our BEAT programs, how do they fare versus those kids who haven't, in terms of the BAS or in terms of MCAS, in terms of any of the markers that we might use. So I think that would be an important piece to know, because if they are different and better, hopefully, then we may learn something from that. I do know we try to get most of the low-income students in Brookline into the BEAT programs, but it still would be interesting to know that, and to know it by both income level and just being in the program or not. The last thing I wanted to say, or the next thing I wanted to say was, I'm not sure if everybody on the committee realizes that we once had a policy, way back when, in the beginning, as Ms. Dudkoff would say, that you had to take a test to be able to get into a math class. You couldn't just be recommended from 8th grade into any math class. You took a test, and that determined where you went. And we purposefully got rid of that, and got rid of and changed the policy so that parents and kids and teachers could recommend that parents and kids basically could decide whatever class they wanted to take, that there wasn't this shutting out of a kid if the parents and the teacher decided that, the parents and the student decided they wanted to take a class that was at a higher level. So that's in our policy book, and that was changed a while back when we thought that there was too much tracking of kids at that time, and there was. So,
Ms. Jennings.
I've been thinking about something that brought me back to the China exchange program, about I think the most tangible thing, the most tangible way that you can see tracking in the school is the way that students don't interact with each other. I think that's a very important aspect that is often overlooked. In academic achievement is important, and that is why we're doing all of this, but the having people exposed to a diverse array of people, and then having that kind of experiences is more, it's the other side of high school that is so formative. And I think that's an aspect that is also makes it more difficult for standard students to move up to honors classes. It's what if you don't know anyone? And what if you don't feel welcome there because no one knows you, you don't know anyone? and because today I was organized alphabetically by the senior grade, and I didn't know half the people around me because I hadn't had classes with them, or I hadn't seen them around, or I think it's just an important aspect of tracking that is definitely should not be overlooked.
Thank you.
That's kind of is an interesting lead into just the little bit that I wanted to add to the conversation, because I've been sort of shifting back and forth through the last hour between trying to be attentive to the conversation about the data and the incredible work that's been done to produce and organize the data right now, which is really what's in front of us. And fascinated when I hear some of my colleagues who are able to extract from the data material questions like Mr. Glover's question about, well, could we cross-correlate it with economic data, and could we, how could we, can we mine this data for more utility? So that's helpful to me, because the other part of my attention is on, okay, I get it. We've got an achievement gap that starts in pre-K and it goes right through 12th grade. What are we going to do about it? It's like, you've demonstrated, let's get on to the real conversation. So I'm sort of, kind of torn back and forth between the two. And because when I think about okay, what are we going to do about it? Again, I'm drawn between, wanting to do real things, but understanding that there's some low-hanging fruit, some things that we can just implement or do better, and then other things that we would that might be ambitious things, but that we would caution ourselves not to try to do 17 new things at once, because we're not going to succeed if we do it that way. So I guess just on that aspect, I think there's I look forward to you, Superintendent, and your staff doing the work that really we can't do, to brainstorm, to test, to organize, and to then bring back to us some kind of array of the implementation ideas that you've been thinking about, to give us a broader picture of where your thoughts and your researches and your travels are taking you, and then along with that, a first picture of some of the things that you might want to consider bringing to us, as well as a kind of a timeline on how all that fits. So that we'll get there, I understand.
Yeah, this very much is the pathway into the summer workshop, where a lot more of that detail will come. I will add, you mentioned something that reminded me of this. You use the term low-hanging fruit, and I think some of this is just as you start thinking about beginning conversations, become more aware, and even take some very small steps, you see change. And so one of our elementary schools around differentiation within reading, last year had 27% of students not meeting expectations or approaching expectations in reading, so 27% below the expected grade level benchmark. Just with some initial work that they've done this year, that same cohort of kids a year later, that number's down to 18%. So 9% of the students made enough progress to move up, and that the distribution went from being mostly in the does not meets and some in approaching expectation, in the 27%, to this year, again, same cohort of kids a year later, much significantly higher number of students in the approaching expectations and significantly fewer in the not meeting expectations. And so I share that to go back to the hopefulness of people's desire to tackle the work. Again, that school didn't take, they weren't leaping off of a cliff. They were taking some very deliberate, very thoughtful steps to move forward, and with one cohort of students, saw some really significant change for those students, and I will say did it in a way that was very inclusive and exciting.
Last comment, Ms. Scotto.
I want to go back to what Alice said, because I think that there's that whole business of, do I have any friends in this class? That's something that can really cause students not to want to go into a different level. And we talked earlier about what had, not tonight, but earlier in the year, about what was happening in English at the 10th grade, where they were doing classes that you could choose whether you were honor or standard, and you were within that class. And that kind of framework allows students to perhaps be in classes with their friends or get to know kids who are taking other level courses. And that might be one thing that we should find out how successful that has been. And actually, we've had a curriculum, I've had some reporting back on that, and I think it has been successful. But that's a mechanism to address that issue.
Thank you. So with your indulgence, I would like to kind of step outside our agenda briefly and ask for comments from the committee. That agenda item was budgeted for 45 minutes. We ran about 35 minutes over. And I think that I personally am happy having moved our main discussion item up in the agenda. I think probably everybody agrees that's a good thing and that's helpful. What I really would like some reflection on is whether this was just an issue of not budgeting adequate time for a vital conversation and everybody's kind of content with the amount of time we took, or do we want to look for ways to streamline our discussions and be more, if you will, efficient around topical conversations like this, if anybody wants to offer any comments. Ms. Scotto.
I think that this has been a very fruitful discussion. Yes, we probably could have done it more quickly, but I think that you have to be very careful when you start thinking about the efficient use of time, because sometimes that can be a driver that doesn't work in the way you want it to work. And I think that these issues are so very important that having time to think about them as the discussion goes on and to continue it for as long as it's being productive, I personally think is important.
Anyone else? Ms. Jennings.
This is something that I'm a Quaker, and I don't know if any of you are familiar with Quaker business method, but this is something that we struggle with a lot. Is time versus productivity and like the power of that, and effectively echoing that is if we don't spend time talking about the things that we have things to say about, we end up pushing forward half-cooked like ideas of stuff that we haven't fully fleshed out or haven't had the time to fully comprehend, and I just think it's very important to give things the time that they demand, I guess would be the word.
Thank you. Yes.
So I'm kind of going in the middle. So I think there probably wasn't enough time allotted for a really important topic. And so somehow we need to think about that when we're planning the agenda. And then I think the other thing is as we're approaching the time that we've allotted for that, we ask, do we want to keep going and we're going to make adjustments somewhere else in the agenda, or do we want to cut it short now and come back to it at another time, so that we make a kind of a decision together about whether we want to keep talking and go off our agenda time and we have to make adjustments, or whether we want to come back to it. That would be my suggestion.
Right. And I will tell you that in this particular instance, as we approached time, I evaluated asking the committee, and then I just made an executive decision that I was going to allow the conversation to go on. But I did consider asking if we wanted additional time, but I really felt that in this conversation that the answer would have been yes, and there was no need to ask the question. Yes.
I think it's something that's great. I've noticed, kind of being newer to the committee, as things come up on the agenda, as you see, they're given weight and amount of time based on what kind of speaker is coming and how much time we think it's going to take, and that
and Robin's expertise.
And, and a lot of times the speakers tailor their presentation to how much time they've been allotted. And so the only thing I do caution, what I like about flexibility in our schedule is that as the talk has kind of led to a lot of questions and discussions, sometimes it grows in time, but I've noticed that the speakers seem to keep their time within what they've been allotted. And so, so I like the idea of having the flexibility when the committee has more discussion and more questions that are coming up, and everyone seems, I think a lot of really great ideas come from, from listening to each other ask questions and talk on the things. So I think that's a wonderful aspect of the meetings. So.
Okay.
I just would like to end this conversation with just to say to the committee, I'm incredibly excited about this work. And I'm incredibly excited that as a district, we have the resources, the expertise, and the will to figure this out and see substantial change. And I'm incredibly excited. I'm incredibly excited to be doing it, to be heading on the right road, and I look forward to our continued work on this together. So, thank you.
Thank you. All right. So on the flexibility topic, Ms. Jennings, if we actually are on time, if we skip several things to the student report, if you're prepared.
I can't really give a comprehensive student report because I've been very loosely at school. But I mean, the end of school is teachers have a way of understanding that we've been through 4 years of hard work and need some time to rest. And so, but I am pleased to announce that Maddie Nagler has been elected for next year me, and she's really cool. She actually wrote and has workshopped a bunch of the proposals that I've mentioned this year, including the homework for your weekends on the quarter ends, and working with the mindfulness initiative with that. She's a very clear speaker, has a lot of very good things to say, and I think she'll do really well. And with that is my last time here, which is, although I am sad about that, I am excited to take home my nice nameplate. And yeah, I would just like to say thank you to everyone here for being a great, welcoming body. And I mean, it's kind of a little bit out of my depth coming into here as a student, and suddenly there are these massive numbers, and I had no idea how much education costed, and now I do kind of, and lots of words that I had to figure out the hard way, or the easy way sometimes. But it's been a really great time, and I thank you for feeding a passion of mine, and I hope to see you in the future. I will definitely be back here. I'm going to college to study this kind of stuff, so I can continue doing this and take your jobs. I was thinking about running, but I don't feel I am remotely qualified. I know that you guys work very, very hard, and I relay that to the school body whenever it comes up. I always tell my friends and my peers that like school committee, you don't really know who they are, but they like do a lot of stuff that helps this thing happen, and without them like volunteering their time and like doing this incredibly hard, detailed, and like all of these deep dives, none of this would have happened, and we're all incredibly grateful, and I'm incredibly grateful. So thank you very much.
So thank you for joining us for this year. It's been a great pleasure to have you as part of our council, really, and the reports you brought from the high school have been fascinating, and I have appreciated your service on our board as I've appreciated each of the high school representative to school committee in the years that I've served. I think that it really broadens our perspective and strengthens our work. So thank you. So we have a card for you that I will pass around.
Very much. I do have more to say. One more
yes,
thing,
please.
Which is that thank you, everyone. I wish, my only regret is that I wish I could have come more, because I find these meetings, like I'm very proud to say that I'm someone that has found myself to really enjoy like long board meetings. Which
it's a secret power.
You are all to blame for that. But
I'm so sorry.
I think this stuff is so interesting, and this is every day I come, I'm so fascinated. But I've had such a busy year, and I wish I could have found the time to come to more of these meetings. And but everything I was here for, and all of the meetings I did like read over, it's incredibly interesting.
Thank you. All right. Yes, Ms. Scotto.
Try to be quiet for the rest of the meeting. But I have to say, I really appreciate the sense that you're thinking about what we're doing. It's almost like you can see the wheels turning, and you're very open in what you say, very open and very spontaneous. And I think that these are characteristics that will stand you well in life. So keep it up, and do come back. And if you stay in Brookline, run for school committee. You can have my seat.
All right, we are on to the third quarter financial report. Mrs. Dunn.
Attached in your packet is the third quarter report that was reviewed at the Finance Subcommittee earlier in May. And right now, or at that time, we were projecting a deficit of just under $80,000. And that's making an assumption that all of our expense accounts would be fully expended. And that balance as of the third quarter was $1.4 million. So we're currently working within the operating budgets to staffing budgets and closing the budget down right now. So I would not expect that we would actually expend that full $1.4 million that shows on page 3 in table 4. One of the changes we made to the quarterly report is to actually show the committee what the current balances are in our expense accounts, so that you can see where the different departments are based on the budget line items, where they are in their spending. But we will explain sort of what our assumption is going forward to the end of the year. So there are some transfers that we require the committee to vote in order to fund various line items. So the first transfer is $100,000 from special education transportation to the special education paraprofessional account. The second is $30,000 from special education contracted services to special education paraprofessional account. And so part of we're funding paraprofessionals that were hired outside of the budget for the remainder of this year in those two cases. And the third transfer is to transfer $103,495 from actually that's from the athletic revolving fund. It's basically transferring expenses. We can't actually transfer money the way this is written. Transfer expenses from the revolving fund to the general fund account, and that's basically to balance out the deficit in the revolving fund for expenditures. And with regard to athletics, this summer, Mike D'Onofrio and myself and Pete Rittenberg and Kyle Williams will be working on what the athletic budget needs to be, what the sports are, and sort of having a proposal ready as part of the FY19 budget process in terms of what should the operating budget fund specifically, what should the fee fund, and then and then begin discussion about increasing the fee for athletics. My understanding is that the fee has not been increased or even a review done since roughly 2007, 2008. So it's a good exercise. We can line up and actually see where sort of solve this long-standing problem with the athletic department or the revolving fund having a deficit, and kind of start to align that from a fee and operating budget standpoint. So that's work that will happen on this athletics specifically during this summer for preparation for FY19, and have a plan or at least have a preview of where we would be in FY18. Are there any questions?
I'm willing to move the meeting along, but I would like the better language on number 3 so that it's clear.
Okay, so that should be
Transfer
$103,495 of expenditures from, and that would be the addition. So of expenditures should be added after the amount $103,495,000.
But the money's going from the athletic.
So the expenditures have been charged to the revolving fund, forcing the revolving fund to be in deficit. So we have to transfer the expenditures. We can't transfer money from revolving to operating, but we can change the expenditures. We have to reclassify the expenditures. Second edit, really. So it should be reclassify expenditures of $103,495. How does that work?
That's
better?
That's better.
Okay.
That feels better. Okay, I move it.
Second. Thank you. Discussion on the motion? All in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Simon. Okay. So, on May 15th of this year, I received a copy of an open meeting law complaint that you have before you, alleging that on May 14th, 2017, I posted a request for support of a Board of Selectmen resolution regarding the Baldwin School project on the Town Meeting Member Association listserv and on the Brookline Public School discussion Facebook page. Copies of the complaint have been distributed to you. Upon learning of this complaint, I consulted with Town Council, who advised me that because less than a quorum of the school committee had access to the TMMA listserv, no violation had occurred. However, she further advised me that because the Facebook post could reach a quorum of the school committee, If this were to occur, it could be considered a violation of the open meeting law by the Attorney General. In order to prevent this from happening, on May 15th, 2017, I promptly removed the post from the Facebook page. I believe that this was an appropriate response and that no remedial action is warranted. In addition, I took the action of distributing to each member of this school committee a copy of the Attorney General's open meeting law guide, which of course you all have and have read previously, because all of us have been through the open meeting law training that includes that. And I also distributed to each of you 2 additional documents, an update from the Attorney General entitled Deliberation and Electronic Communications, new as of March 10th, 2017, which was a 1-page sort of FAQ from the Attorney General, and also a legal article from the Municipal Advocate titled, quote, To Tweet or Not to Tweet, Social Media, Public Records, and the Open Meeting Law, which I actually found interesting. That's my report, and I open this to discussion by the school committee. So I will make a motion to authorize town council to transmit the May 15th complaint and a description of my response to the Attorney General. Do I have a second? Thank you, Ms. Scotto. Any further discussion of this motion?
Just a question. Do we normally vote these things?
According to town council. That's... I was requested to ask for a vote for her to transmit this to the Attorney General, which is procedure, I guess. Mr. Glover.
I mean, I sort of have the same question. I mean, it's your alleged violation, right?
Yes.
Well, and furthermore, if I may just add to that, we have had open meeting law violation complaints in the past that town council dispatches with, if I'm not mistaken.
So I believe what we're doing right now is reviewing the complaint, which because I'm a member of the, I'm not completely solid on this, but according to town council, we had 15 business days for the school committee to review the complaint, which is what we're doing here. And because it was, even though I posted to TMMA, having posted on the Facebook page, the alleged violation was an open meeting law violation of school committee. The need to post that it was inviting, presumably inviting deliberation of the school committee outside of a posted meeting. And so then the school committee is reviewing this. Yes, Mr. Kang.
Could we get a more specific question also why this needs to be across the open meeting laws? I mean, I explain why.
Well, the vote, according to her, is to authorize her to transmit the complaint and a description of my response to the Attorney General. She's required to do that, and because it's a school committee matter, she wants school committee to instruct her to transmit it. Now, I, as chair, and also as the person who received the complaint, could just tell her to do it.
Well, I just want to sort of go back to the procedural question of, like, why are we voting this at all? And I don't think we voted this before, and maybe we should have, maybe we shouldn't have, but I think it'd just be helpful to Mr. Chang's point, and I think perhaps to where Mr. Glover was going, it'd just be helpful to understand what is the school committee's role here, because this is not something that we have been asked to do before. In the past, we've had open meeting violation complaints that town council has simply dealt with. And so if there was supposed to be something else that happened, that would be good to know. But I don't recall voting this in the past.
A question. We have had discussion of people complaining about our violations of open meeting law. We have never and this just could be because nobody has done it, but we have never received what looks like an official form. The entire school committee has never received, to my memory, an official form complaining.
Right, so
Did
this
he
was,
do a
this was
different
this was
procedure than the other
presented in this
people?
form. It was presented in person to town council on the Monday morning, May 15th.
I'm just wondering if the way it was done
It
is what makes...
may, it may be that people
this-
complained about it, but never filed a complaint
Right.
before, but I don't know.
That's my question, really.
It also just strikes me that if the town council wants us to vote something, number one, we haven't docketed a vote, and number two, we don't have language for a vote. So I'm not exactly sure what she wants us to vote, nor am I sure that since we haven't docketed a vote, we can vote it.
Well, we are required within 14 business
Yeah, there's
days
a time
to
sensitivity.
have this review and then send the complaint along with a description of the action that we took, which is this discussion, to the Attorney General's. In fact, it's not clear from, that we have to vote.
14 business days has passed.
No, it isn't. Since the,
Well, it depends on whether you count Memorial Day. Okay, maybe it's tomorrow. It might be tomorrow.
yeah,
I'm looking at a
sort
calendar.
of, this date was determined to be within 14 business days. I mean, I think we can, yes.
It's just the issue to resolve the alleged complaint is presentation here at this. Is
This
that?
review, we're having a review and we've accomplished it, yeah.
We've done that. So
Yeah.
so anybody can tell the AG that we've done that.
And
That's
send
it.
a
It's
copy
just
of the complaint.
Right, that doesn't require a vote. It's just it's a recitation of facts of things that actually occurred, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't
I'm content to tell town council that we had this discussion, that we went through all of the things, including the everything that happened, and that and ask her to forward it to the AG. Well, it's not even a response. It's just forward. The complaint needs to be sent to the Attorney General, who doesn't have it yet. No, it was from Richard Nangle, who.
Richard Nangle.
Yeah, no. You got it from Jocelyn Murphy.
Can I take a Solomonic approach here?
So, well, I mean, what I was suggesting is that I'm content to simply tell town council to send this along to the Attorney General's and then to come back to us and clarify whether in future we actually need to vote or not.
I'll second that.
I think we can do that. Well, you don't need a vote.
Right, now I'm just saying,
Well, actually, I would like to sort of make sure that in case we did have to, that there would be a vote, because of the time-sensitive nature of this. Unless we know for a fact we don't, I would rather err on the side of,
She just said the school committee needs to send it.
oh, then it's not, okay, never mind.
So as long as you authorize me to send it,
Yeah.
or, as long as you're in agreement in this, I don't hear any objections. I don't hear any
Okay, never mind, I take my comments back.
All right, so let's move on. Thank you. Okay, proposed vote to approve the 2017-2018 tuition for non-resident international students attending the public schools of Brookline. Ms. Dunn?
So the memo is in regards to tuition rate for our CVIS program, which are F1 students, which we have 1 or 2 students per year at the high school in a 1-year exchange. And so the tuition is based on the most recent DESE per pupil amount from the end-of-year report that we file annually with them, and then I increase it roughly 5%, which is 2.5 per year for the 2 years that we don't have a per pupil rate for, because I don't know what FY18's per pupil rate is yet, because it's all inclusive of town and school expenditures. And we also include for information fees or rates or budget amounts for school lunch, co-curricular field trips, any tutoring services that the student may want to have, and to give a family sort of a budget amount of how much, will I need to provide for this. It does not include housing. Housing is done separately not through us, not through the district, but roughly, I've been told that's roughly anywhere between $10,000 and $20,000 that a host family would receive with an F1 student on exchange at a maximum. So with that, I'd like to recommend the school committee approve the tuition rate for the 2017-28 school year for non-resident students attending the public schools as international non-resident students.
Ms. Jennings.
I'm sure this is incredibly benevolent, but on the background section, it says like with the capacity, it says the physical capacity of our buildings has reached a point whereby the services need to be significantly scaled back and advertised as such to the international community. The services being the English language learner services, and that seems like a dramatic link that I don't know if I'm missing something with that, but to say that we need to significantly scale back our English language learners because of capacity.
So these are not English language learners. These are students who come on a one-year exchange from any country across the world. They should already have English proficiency.
I'm just confused about the background.
So part of, they should already be coming with English proficiency they take a TOEFL, which is a English proficiency exam.
I don't even think it's that much related to this specific, actual action, but the statement saying that because Brookline is so, has a good reputation for international students, but because we have reached capacity, we should scale back the services of English language learners.
I don't think it says
That's not
that.
what it's saying.
I think the services that it's referring to are actually just offering the tuition program.
Oh, okay.
I think that
Yes.
it's just the opportunity to
So-
enroll this way.
The way to think about this is these are students who would go otherwise to a private school in the United
I
States.
see. It's the wording that confused me.
And, yeah. And
I'll look at that for next year's memo. Thank you.
Something under the asterisk that says athletics, field trips, and other curriculum-based activities are charged through an online payment system. Does that mean that if they are to send you a check for what they owe you, they would pay the $25,000 minus the $3,000 because that will be charged?
So one of the components of our student fees, fines, and charges policy is that we will be using an online payment system to notify parents and guardians of fees. So it's really to notify them, how would I know about any of these fees if they were charged, school lunch or a field trip? It's through an online payment system. It's not that we would do it all at once, because the only thing we would do is the tuition. And that would allow them to actually be able to pay. So we have to deal with either wire transfers or payments electronically. So it actually makes it a lot easier to be an online payment than taking it and then getting a check.
Right,
from a
so
foreign country.
you would be getting a check then just for $19,000.
We would be getting an electronic payment for just $19,000.
Right, and then the rest of this would be
It would be notified
electronic.
in terms of as they were
Ms.
assessed or charged.
Ms. Dunn, could you just remind the committee of what our current and recent enrollment history under this program is and has been?
So I believe in this current school year, we have had one full-year student and one student for 6 months. Last year, we maybe had the same 2 students. The year prior, there may have been up to 5.
Okay, and then
It varies. It's not really many
just
more
just
than
for
that.
from a procedural standpoint, could we have a motion on the floor?
I'll move it.
Thank you. Is there a second? A second. Thank you. Okay, yes. More further discussion?
So this program in the past, when probably the long past, I'm giving you a history lesson again here, guys, sorry about this, but 20 years ago, we didn't even charge for the F1 visa, and kids came, and when we realized what was going on and how Brookline High School was basically being used by fairly wealthy foreign students to come to the United States and get a U.S. education, we sort of figured out how to manage this. The part that's interesting to me is, I mean, if these same students were to go to Dexter or to Belmont Hill or wherever, they'd be paying twice as much as this. From my understanding, from what you've said to us in the past, there's no way that we could charge more. We can? It's not limited to what our per pupil cost
No,
is.
I've increased the per pupil by 5% because that's,
But we could determine today that to charge more?
You could tell me that, no, we want to add another 10,000 to this. Or you could say 5,000, but I would say that requires a lot.
I think we need to let people know, certainly, but, yeah.
It has to be tied to the actual cost of the education, right? It can't be.
Not in terms of the tuition and fees, no, not really. Not with international students, not with this particular program. So if we were charging another district for another public school student, then we have some obligation in terms of what that tuition cost is and justifying our costs. So we can tuition in students, for example, we've had some discussions about the Winthrop House, and we've actually been approached by some districts, can we actually tuition students into Winthrop House, and so what would we charge? And so I would go through the same kind of methodology of, here's what we would charge in terms of our tuition and what that is. We have an experience with some of the vocational and vocational schools who, if we're not a member district of that particular school, they set a tuition rate that is significantly higher than their per pupil to non-member students that enroll in that school. And that
Passes muster?
does usually, you have to have a rationale for what that would be. And so that's part of where I went to the 5%, which is, it's a 16 number, 2.5 each year for the 2 years that would be, for 17 and 2.5 for into 18, so that we're at least keeping pace with it.
I would just say, to the extent that we're trying to think of it as a profit center, I would check with town council before we treated it that way. I don't think we're necessarily doing that here.
And frankly, we don't have enough students to make that much money on it.
Right. Well, but it's just, there's, at some point, well, there's case law that says that it effectively becomes a tax, and we don't have taxing authority that way. So when you go beyond what the actual costs are, so that's my only.
Well, Mary Ellen, if you have some free time on your hands, which you don't, other comparable districts, what they charge for the F1 visas, that would give us a good benchmark.
Yep. And also, I would like to incorporate this, as well as many of our other fees, into a fee table in our FY19 budget, so that this would get voted at the same time the FY19 budget gets voted, as opposed to a separate item, and becomes part of a routine.
And this will probably become a moot point once our high school gets to 2,500 kids. I don't think that we would be necessarily looking to increase our enrollment at that point.
Okay. All in favor? It is unanimous. And we have arrived at the superintendent's report. Mr. Bob.
So first page of the report is updated town meeting. This is the letter that was sent to all staff following town meeting last week that you received a copy of, so I will not read through it now. I'll turn to page 2, starting with the Driscoll School Principal transition. As everyone knows, on May 22nd, which was Monday a week ago, Principal Cook announced that she's taking a new position with Cambridge Public Schools. I want to say that we all wish Heidi the best in her new endeavor. I communicated with the Driscoll community May 22nd, that Monday, and followed up with the letter below yesterday. informing the community that I will be appointing an interim principal for the 2017-2018 school year. You can see that in the specifics of the letter, given the announcement, the late announcement, we simply don't have time. There are 16 days of school remaining. So it is just simply not enough time to post, recruit, get a deep pool of applicants, do first, second round interviews, do site visits and candidate forums. And so consistent with the school committee policy, this is a position that needs to be filled on an interim basis. I anticipate being able to make an interim announcement next week, and then considering candidates, high-quality candidates, both from within and outside of the school system. We plan on launching the comprehensive search to identify the permanent leader for Driscoll in late fall. I would anticipate the appropriate timeline being posting the job around Thanksgiving, beginning the first round interviews in January, moving through first round, second round, again, site visits, candidate forums, reference checks, etc., to name permanent principal somewhere around early March. Townwide orchestra, chorus, concert band, and jazz band had an incredibly successful day on Saturday, May 20th. Each of these bands or performing groups was invited to the Music in the Park Festival at Six Flags. And want to highlight that our townwide orchestra received first place, a superior rating, and the best overall orchestra. Our townwide chorus, Voices of Brookline, received first place in the middle school mixed choir with an excellent rating. Our townwide concert band received first place with a superior rating, with the overall middle school concert band award awarded. And townwide jazz band received first place with an excellent rating. In Lincoln School 8th grade, alto saxophonist Shingo Murata received overall best middle school jazz soloist. So congratulations to all of the students. Thank you to Rick Stone, Holly Ahern, John Ferguson, and our assistant directors Colin Stack, Christoph Brown, Gracie Lane for all their hard work and dedication over the course of the year in supporting our students. Last Friday, third graders at Devotion School celebrated John F. Kennedy's 100th birthday at a What John F. Kennedy Means to Me. I apologize, I will correct the M, as JFK means to me. So each of the fifth grade classes at Devotion wrote poems about John F. Kennedy. And then each individual student wrote an essay that was then selected by their peers. Essays were selected one for recognition and one for best essay in the class. It was a wonderful ceremony, a great level of excitement. Our the writing was incredible. Students were well prepared, poised, thoughtful, and it's due to the amazing support they received from the Devotion, third grade classroom teachers, and special educators. And I want to highlight that team: Gretchen Albertini, Andrea Perkaki, Jennifer Driscoll, Christy Buttery, Kim French, Alice Duquette, Janice Godet, Jessica Falzone, and Melissa Horowitz. May is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and I was pleased to be able to join Brookline's AAPI celebration sponsored by Baffin here in the school committee room on May 24th. The celebration featured honors and awards for BHS students, including the winner of the What Does It Mean to be Asian American in Brookline Essay Contest. The evening also featured an excerpt of the acclaimed new PBS documentary, The Chinese Exclusion Act, with a discussion from Andrew Lung, Associate Professor in the Philosophy Department and Asian American and Latino Studies at UMass Boston. I want to recognize that the Baffin Award for the winners were, the first was Brookline Asian American and myself, was won by Elizabeth Hee-Yun Rothman, BHS 12th grader, soon to be graduate. The Best Contest Award went to All It Takes Is One Class, Emily Zhu, BHS grade 10, and Best Creativity is the Family Photo, Rachel Percy, BHS grade 11. And then Best Content Award, I apologize, this late hour I read the typo. Best Content Award was Emily Zhu. Last night, Headmaster Meyer, our school committee member, Ms. Charlupsky, and I were at BHS to celebrate graduates of the ACE program, Alternative Choices in Education. As you know, ACE is Brookline's competency-based program that provides rigorous college-based preparation pathway in which students are placed in multi-age classes based on skill level. The students can proceed at their own pace and graduate when they complete their content and skill competencies. It was a wonderful ceremony. There are only 6 students graduating from ACE, or are 6 students graduating from ACE this year. That is due to the transition 2 years ago from OFC into ACE. Next year's class is anticipated to have 22 ACE graduates. So it is a program, it's nearly at its capacity of 45 students this year. So it's a program that has gained a lot of momentum, as you know, was recognized earlier this year by the Rennie Center, and that report was shared by Ms. Charlupsky. It was an incredible ceremony, and I am glad that we were able to attend. Tonight was the MEDCO recognition. Tomorrow night is the SWS recognition. Next Tuesday is a Steps to Success recognition for end of year celebration, and Sunday, of course, is BHS graduation starting at 1 p.m. And I just want to notify the committee that I've invited the new Runkle principal, Gentine Jean-Michel, and new Lawrence principal, Allison Hart, to join us Thursday, June 15th, prior to our final school committee meeting of the year for a brief reception designed to be an informal opportunity for you to meet the newest members of our leadership team. And at 6 o'clock, I will present them to the committee and allow for any questions that you may have for them. Thank you.
Just one question. Who's the speaker for the high school graduation? Do we have an outside speaker or just teachers? I'm sorry.
The name just escaped me. It is someone who works for the Red Sox organization, and I apologize. The name.
Sam Kennedy?
Sam Kennedy, yes.
Oh, he's a Brookline High School graduate of 19, with my son. I'm trying to remember which year it was. He's great.
Quick question, quick comment. Might we hope to meet the Driscoll interim principal on the same evening?
Yes, that is the goal.
If not earlier. Well, actually, that's our next meeting. Okay, excellent. Not that I'm interested in that in any way, shape, or form as a Driscoll parent. Second comment, which is that the townwide jazz band performed at the Memorial Day celebration in front of Town Hall in the rain and gale force winds. There was music flying everywhere. And Mr. Stone did an incredible job. And all the students came on Memorial Day that morning, and they played 3 different pieces. They were noted by the chairman of the Board of Selectmen, by multiple speakers for their incredible skill. They sounded great, and it was really bad weather to be sounding good. They were a little flat towards the end, but amazing. And I think people were completely blown away by the fact that they were just a bunch of 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. I think people thought they were much more advanced than that. So at any rate, they endured rain and gale force winds, and he did a terrific job kind of keeping them together. So.
All right. So we have now arrived at subcommittee and liaison reports. Novel experience.
We last the 22nd is a Monday, and Mary Ellen has addressed basically what we discussed at that meeting, which is the Q3 financial report. So really not much else to discuss. However, I want to point out that the current meeting, which is scheduled for Tuesday, the 13th of June, may need to be rescheduled because Mary Ellen is going to be away. So stay tuned for that. But I think what we will be discussing and towards the workshop, the budget priorities for this coming fiscal year.
Capital improvements, Ms. Charlupsky.
Sure. So The devotion project, there will be at the next building commission meeting on the 13th, a walkthrough of the devotion project. So if people are interested, it's an open meeting, so obviously you can come and walk through the building. I'm not sure if the building commission is planning on having their actual meeting there afterwards or not, but this is happening at 5:30. We have our capital subcommittee meeting from 4. It'll probably only be an hour, Ms. Dunn, correct? If we have to get over to the devotion school at 5:30. I know, that's what oh, and then we wouldn't have to move. That's an excellent idea. We could meet in the tractor trailer there. Okay. So then our capital subcommittee meeting will be there on site, and then we'll have the tour of the school, and everybody's welcome to come. There is a committee of 7 that has been set up to go over the submittals of the proposals for the high school architectural services and the owner's project manager. And we hope to have decided on the firms to be interviewed and the interviews to be completed by the end of the month. And those dates have been put out by Ms. Ditkoff to make sure that we get this all in on time. At this point, there's nothing more to relate, I don't think, on the Baldwin School, though you can, if there's anything. There was, the votes at town meeting. We've met, though, since town meeting, so that's been discussed. That's not important.
We haven't met, but I think an email went out with both the votes for funding.
Yeah, I mean, very quickly, the high school vote was 216 to 1 in favor of allocating $1.85 million to move into continued feasibility and schematic. The 9th school, the motion to appropriate $1.5 million to continue work on developing the design for the 9th school with only $100,000 to be spent to complete feasibility, with the remaining $1.4 million subject to a special town meeting, was approved 182 to 30.
So
it was final vote was 185 to 32. It was revised on Thursday night.
So both of those are very good news, I think, for us in terms of both projects going forward. The last item that I have, there was a community meeting for the new BEEP building on Harvard that we saw we had the presentation. That same presentation was done for community members, actually in the workspace in the Brookline Village. There's a very interesting new workspace, just so people know this, that you can rent out. Co-working. Okay. Co-working space that they rent out offices or conference rooms, and we had part of the downstairs there. There were about 30 people who attended the meeting, including a number of town meeting members from the area and a number of residents from Auburn Street. Vicki Milston, our principal, did a wonderful job of presenting the program, and the architect showed the drawings that we all saw, and the residents got a chance to ask questions, and most of the questions got answered, I think. Overall, the tenor of the meeting was very respectful and felt good. I think that would be my report on that. So that's it for capital, unless there's any other questions.
Thank you. Ms. Scotto, curriculum.
Yes, not too much to report about curriculum, except that there are many meetings coming up. There are 3 site council meetings that are being held, one at Brookline High School, one at Runkle, one at Devotion, and that will be held at Lower Devotion in the principal's conference room. These are on your sheet. There is also one before the next school committee meeting, in which the principal at Lawrence and the principal from Pierce will be coming to talk about their school improvement programs and just in general how their year has gone. And there will be a curriculum subcommittee meeting on, if I can find it, June 15th at 8:30 a.m. And at that point, and actually we have that June 15th, we have a 7 a.m. meeting at Lower Devo, which is going to be difficult to get there. And then this 8:30 meeting back here, but this 8:30 meeting may be starting a little later than that because we have to get from one place to the other. And it depends on how long the other one runs. But the agenda for that is really loose at this point. One is to revisit after-school contracts at BHS, which we talked briefly about the last time, and to look at a presentation on makerspaces that was done at the ECS meeting last month. So that's all right now that's on the agenda. And that's all I have.
So I'll go ahead with the government relations report, just to move the meeting along here. And if I can ask for the indulgence of the committee, part of my government relations report has to do with EDCO, because Alice Peisch, the co-chair of the Education Committee, the State Education Committee, was at the EDCO collaborative meeting. So it just seems natural if I can report on both of them together, if that's okay with everybody. The first piece of news from EDCO was that Winchester has decided to withdraw from EDCO. They belong to SEAM Collaborative, which is a collaborative further north, and where they get most of their special education collaborative special education seats. And they felt that when they were trying to balance their budget, this was something that they didn't see that made sense. It's not exactly clear to me, but that's basically what their decision was. It doesn't have an impact on our assessments, which is a good thing. Our assessments are still going to be continued to be lower. The way I think I presented that a few sessions back. In addition, as I mentioned to Mr. Bott a couple weeks ago, the EMI, which has turned into IDEAS, and somebody's going to have to help me. It's a group that's what does it stand for? EMI and IDEAS. Shoot. It has to do with training for race relations, for academic, the achievement gap, and it's these communities, all our communities, the EDCO communities, coming together and working on those issues. A lot of staff training, professional development, workshops and things like that. And up until now, we had to pay a fee for that. That's now going to be included in our membership at EDCO. And EDCO has now fully leased out all its space. As you may remember or may not know or not remember, EDCO moved to a new building in Bedford. It was 3 times the size. In the meantime, they have leased out space to the CASE Collaborative for some classrooms, to Lab has their administrative offices there. These are all different collaboratives that mostly have EDCO members in them. It's interesting. Some school districts belong to 3 different collaboratives. We only belong to the one. And anyway, so that was the business side of the meeting. The budget's set for next year with a little bit of a the budget's a balanced budget for next year, basically, for EDCO. For most of the meeting the last time, Ms. Peisch came, Representative Peisch came. She, as some of you may or may not know, was a school committee member in Weston before she went to the State House, and she co-chairs with Sonia Chang Diaz the Education Committee. She was saying at that point, that was last week, that the Senate was finishing up their budget. They've since finished their budget. She felt that there would be very modest changes in Chapter 70, if any, and her biggest concern was the $5 million deficit for this year and the budget estimates for next year that are probably overestimates if this year is any indication of what next year might be like. She did say, I asked her a number of questions actually, that the foundation budget review, she would want it to be done in a budget formula for a bottom line to deliver high quality education. Senator Chang Diaz has a plan for implementation of Chapter 70 foundation budget through legislation. So there's sort of a little bit of warring going on there on how it's going to happen, when it's going to happen. The biggest problem is there's not the money to make it happen, from what I can tell. I don't know if anybody else has any other insights into this, but there are two bills that were reported out favorably. One on collaboratives, which right now I don't remember all the details about that. She did talk about that. But the more important one, I think, for us was, many of you remember the UNS initiative back 10 years ago, where maybe you don't remember, there was a ballot question actually that required schools to have immersion, English immersion for students, and that would separate, very unlike what we do in Brookline for English language learners, separate these kids into separate classes, teach them, try and do an immersion method of teaching English, and not a very successful way, but it was something that came out of California. And you're looking at me sort of confused. Am I not being clear? Or no, David, I thought you were looking at me confused. Anyways, this new bill, I think, basically sort of validates what we do for English language learners. And so I think it's probably a very good thing. The other piece that some people talked about with her was to try and get some legislation that would, the state would cover the cost of translation services. As many of you know, we have to translate documents into many different languages, and some of the low incidence languages are very difficult to find people to translate, let alone, and then pay for it. The cost of it is quite high. So she actually picked up on that, and some of the school committee members and superintendents were going to speak to her about the possibility, since many of these documents are statewide documents even that might need to be translated, or if the state had these services available for us, it would certainly help our budget, I'm sure. And DISA won't allow Google Translator, actually, to do these translations. I'm not sure Google Translator is the best translator, because I've tried it sometimes with languages and it doesn't really do well. But anyways, that was the reasoning that they felt that this was important. The focus of the Education Committee, much like our focus, is on trying to close the achievement gap. This was an hour discussion with her. I'm just trying to distill sort of the pieces of it, but I think it was a very good discussion. She said, we do well as a state, but student score, as well, the issue is the achievement gap. And she wants more flexibility for level 3 schools, similar to what's going on in Springfield. I'm not sure if, Springfield has this sort of a lot of private dollars going into it along with state dollars to really work on their achievement gap and work on their schools. And the issue of MSBA came up, and why they only allow one project at a time for a district when there are districts that have increasing enrollments and can't, this is true for us, true for Lexington, true for Newton, and a few of the other EDCO communities too. She didn't have a lot to say about that, but it was discussed at least. And there is, I think, a group of school committee members from some of the EDCO communities that are trying to get together to work on something about MSBA and getting them to be willing to at least tell us, could we even get in the queue? Would we be accepted in 3 years, in 5 years? Something type of thing. And the last piece, I asked her about METCO funding. And the Senate put in $22.4 million, and it was more money than what the House put in, which then it goes to a joint committee that decides somewhere probably in the middle, but depending what it's going to be. But she didn't think it was going to be less than what we got this year. Oh, and that the Metco board is looking for a new CEO. They've reorganized and are now in the process of a search. I think that's it, unless anybody has any questions. Oh, I asked another question. What about the desire of the legislature to increase revenues? And that went over like a dead on arrival. She said that, they've tried to tax everything that they could tax, but the voters voted not to raise, to lower the income tax. And she thought the only possibility might be the ballot initiative that's coming up. Anybody have any questions? There's a lot of stuff. Thank you.
Policy review, Mr. Chen. We met yesterday, continuing our work on student access, physical education, as well as health. The revised draft will next go to principals and PTO chairs for their comments. Right now, the timing is really a first reading. Let me add one more thing, which is not on there, because Michael and I just wrote this prior to the school committee meetings, that there will be a negotiation meeting next Wednesday between 8 and 8:30 to go over the salary raises that are outlined, which was something that obviously came before us last time. We wanted additional conversation, and so
Maybe we can take this offline. I know we set up a meeting for that, but I still had questions about whether negotiations needs to weigh in on that, but we can talk about that offline. Yeah, okay.
I also I think the sense that I got from the group is that there was actually information that people wanted, kind of benchmarked information from other peer communities. So a piece of it might just be sending out that information, which I think Ms. Dunn said she had. So I think a piece of it might be just sending that information confidentially or not to in whatever form is appropriate to the full committee, because I think that was the question that a lot of people had. I had it, but I think other people did as well.
Yeah, why don't Michael and I speak with Mary Ellen? I know last time that the committee got a packet with different ranges, and we'll speak with Mary Ellen in terms of the backup data that supported the proposed ranges for the non-lines.
Okay. Additional liaisons and updates. Mr. Glover.
Just very briefly, Steps to Success had its board meeting on Wednesday morning. Just a couple highlights from that. The Steps Gala raised approximately $60,000, which was great. They are in the beginning phases of a new strategic planning process, which I think is good to hear, and hopefully will generate a good strategic plan for them going forward. I don't know how long that will take, but it will take some time, obviously, to complete that process. And we did end up amending their bylaws at this most recent meeting, and Superintendent Bott and I and Mr. Pollack, you or your designee, are no longer board members, ex officio board members. We have created a new role of ex officio advisors, where we're not members of the board of directors, but we have the ability to advise the board of directors. That's it.
Excellent. Ms. Charlowski.
I think the powers that be don't want me to speak because they took away my microphone here. I think I
Nevertheless, she
spoke.
persisted.
But I persist. Nevertheless, she persisted, right. So there was a Beep Connections meeting, and you guys all know how excited I get about these meetings, so I want to share some of that excitement with you about what's going on. It was a smaller meeting than usual, but the Parent-Child Home Program reported that they are getting a little bit more funding next year. This year, they've been working actually for this year and I think last year too with 20 families in housing, 10 families in the first year of their program and 10 families in the second, so they sort of stay with the family for 2 years. This is a home visiting program where the home visitor goes in and works with the parent with toys and reading and all sorts of help in terms of helping young parents of 2-year-olds to navigate Brookline, navigate parenthood, and all those things to help the children basically come into Beep. And it's sort of a pipeline, which is a good pipeline, straight from there into Beep. They get recommended from this program. The parents learn to sign up on time to get into Beep, and it's been a very, very good program for Brookline. We've had it probably for the last 10 years, but I think in the last 3 or 4 years it's really sort of upped its ability to serve families and do some really good work. The other thing that I was really pleased to hear, that launch is happening this summer. I remember last year we talked about it, that it didn't happen for a variety of reasons, and this year it will be happening. There's 4 classrooms of 15 children in each classroom, and some partnership with the rec department. Not a lot. That's the one thing I think we need to work on a bit. There's launch, and I think there's one other summer program that's going besides launch. Am I correct?
There is. The name escapes me, but there
Yes.
is.
Yeah, it escapes me right now, too, and I didn't write it down. Okay. That's it.
Thank you. So we do have a hot off the press update from town council. Except that this thing went to sleep. Oh, there we go. I'm not sure that that's the case.
For that, there's one thing that sounded interesting. On June 9th, there's a food truck Friday at the Driscoll School. Did you hear about this? For families to go and get food, and there'll be music and all sorts of interesting things. It's from 4 till 8 p.m.
Okay, so town council refers us to the procedure in the open meeting law guide that we all have recently received, which states that, quote, while the public body may delegate responsibility for responding to the complaint to council, it must first meet to do so, and then town council goes on to provide an opinion to us, which is that such delegation requires a vote. So in other words, the vote would be that we, the school committee, who have an obligation to report to the Attorney General, that we can delegate that responsibility to town council. And so we as a body need to delegate, and she believes that a vote is required in order to delegate. That's
I make a motion that we delegate.
to town council.
I'll second it.
Discussion, Mr. Glover? No discussion? All in favor? I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 opposed. Abstentions? Okay. We have 5 in favor. We delegate. Okay, new business.